34 girls drink dew from a rag every morning. The river dried up 2 months ago. All that's left to eat are 6 dried fish, and the captain, sword in hand, stares at the stranger and vows to kill him in 7 days. He's no mage, no warrior, he's a builder, and he has exactly 30 days to save them all. But let's back a few hours. Seo Junseok opens his eyes and sees 2 moons above him, one white right overhead, the second golden hiding behind the trees. The stars hang too close, as if someone had held a black tray of spilled rice up to his face. He lies in a ravine on dry grass. Nearby, a blackened circle marks the spot of a long extinguished fire. His head is buzzing as if he'd been hit on the head with a rail. There's a taste of iron in his mouth. He touches the back of his head. His fingers are clean. No blood, no bumps. The last thing he remembers? Wet tiles at the underground passage at the Gyeongdong market. The smell of dried peppers. His mother's voice in his earpiece talking about ginger. Then a blow. Then nothing. And now 2 moons and grass that smells not of soul, but of something bitter and ancient. Somewhere behind the trees a woman is crying. Quietly. Exhaustedly. That's how you whimper when you've been sobbing for days and have no strength left to cry out loud. Junseok stands up, his own body, the same t-shirt with the construction company logo, the same jeans, the same sneakers, but the ground beneath his soles is foreign. The air is thicker and colder, and there isn't a single sound of the city in it. No honking, no highways, only the weeping and the chirping of insects he's never heard before. He takes a step toward the bushes, and then it flashes before his eyes. A translucent window hangs in the air within arm's reach. Korean script. Colonizer system activated. Settlement detected in critical condition. 34 residents. Food for 6 days. Infrastructure 0%. Begin construction. He pokes the window with his finger. His fingers pass right through it. The window flashes and remains. He looks at the crying. A silhouette is visible through the branches. A slender figure is bent over something motionless, covered with a rag. And on top of the figure's head are 2 triangular ears, and a tail twitches behind it. The engineer's mind runs through possibilities. A dream, a coma, a hallucination, the afterlife. None of them explains why the grass is real, why the cold stings his skin, or why this crying squeezes something inside him. For 12 years he delivered construction projects on time, even when supplies were delayed. He fed crews of 40 men when paychecks were delayed. He knows that any disaster can be broken down into tasks, tasks into subtasks, subtasks for morning and evening. He looks at the window and speaks aloud, calmly, as if at a morning planning meeting. Right, we'll hand over the site in 30 days. Let's go. He pushes the branches. The girl looks up. Her eyes are wet, huge, amber. Her ears are pinned back, 2 tails. She's about 14. She looks at him like a cornered animal, not with hope, with utter desperation. Junseok crouches down. He doesn't know a word of the local language, but the window was in Korean, so the system does something to the speech. He tries. I won't hurt you. She blinks. She understands. A young woman lies beneath the rag. The cat-like ears are pale. Her face is gray. She's barely breathing. He places his palm on her forehead. Fever, severe dehydration, maybe an infection. The girl with 2 ponytails is named Serin. The one lying down is named Dahe. She fell 3 days ago and hasn't gotten up since. Water. Saren shakes her head. The river dried up 2 months ago. They drink dew from a cloth in the mornings. 34 people drink dew from cloth. Junseok closes his eyes for a second. Take me to the elder. She leads him through a dead forest. The trees are gray, without a single leaf. The ground is dry and cracked. Not a blade of grass or a speck of moss, as if someone had sucked all life out of it. He takes it in. The soil is clayey, the cracks are deep, the trees are dead, but the roots are still there, so the soil isn't poisoned, just dry. The forest opens onto a clearing, and Junseok freezes. 3 shelters made of branches, a fire pit without a fire. Pieces of fabric are stretched out, girls lie beneath them, all with cat ears, all thin. Some have ribs showing through their clothes. The clothes were once military uniforms, black tunics with silver trim, now rags. On each girl's wrists are identical brands seared into the skin. 30 pairs of eyes are fixed on him, on the man, Here, among them, a woman emerges from the far tent. No, a warrior. Even after months of starvation, you can tell by her posture, black hair down to her waist, green eyes, narrow and cold as blades, black ears with a silver tassel. Her stride is steady. Every step says she'll kill him with her bare hands if he's dangerous. A sword at her belt, the only sword in the camp. She stops 2 steps away. Who are you? A voice like sandpaper. Seo Junseok, engineer. The word means nothing to her. Where are you from? From far away. Very far away. She places her hand on the hilt. What do you want from us? He scans the huts, the extinguished fire pit, the girls lying down, 6 dried fish on a rock by the fire. 6 out of 34. What's your name? Rina Ha, captain of the Moonclaws. Every word comes out of her like a shard of something broken. Junseok nods. Rina, I build. I know how to keep people from dying of hunger and thirst and cold. I'm not a soldier, not a mage. I have no weapons and no army, but I know how to find water beneath this earth. I know how to raise a warm house from clay and wood. I know how to grow food on a barren field, and I'll do all of this in 30 days. I need one thing. Don't get in my way. Rina stares at him for a long time. Her gaze sweeps over the camp. Dahe under a rag. 6 fish on a rock. She takes her hand off her sword. If nothing changes in 7 days, I'll kill you myself. He doesn't smile. In 7 days, you'll be drinking clean water and sleeping in the warmth. This isn't a promise. It's a schedule. Rina turns and walks away. Saren tugs at his sleeve. She asks if it's true that he'll find water. He looks at her, 2 tails twitching with excitement. At her slender wrists with, yes, in the morning. He doesn't sleep. All night he walks through the gray forest. The system window glows before him like a navigator. It shows the terrain. It shows the soil. Clay, sandstone, an aquifer beneath the sandstone, a depth of 1.5 meters. Junseok smiles for the first time since waking up. The river hasn't dried up. It's gone under the clay. He saw something like this at a construction site when they were digging the foundation for a parking lot. The water hasn't gone anywhere. It's just hiding. He returns at dawn. The girls are already awake. They're sitting in a circle around the dead fire, dividing 6 fish into 34 pieces. The freckled redhead is cutting the fish with a knife. Each piece is the size of a fingernail. Junseok approaches Rina. I need a knife and 4 people who can dig. Rina nods to the redhead. Mary, give him the knife. The redhead looks up. She holds out the knife, handle first. If you lose it, I'll bury you with these hands. Her voice is hoarse and defiant, even on the brink of starvation. Junseok takes the knife. I won't lose it. Let's go. Junseok led the 4 of them to the dried-up bed of the Eunho River. Mary walked in front. Behind her were 2 girls whose names he didn't yet know. Bringing up the rear was a short, light blonde girl with fluffy reddish ears and an apron from which dry blades of grass stuck out. She walked quietly and tried not to look at Junseok. The riverbed looked like a scar on the earth, wide, dry. The bottom was covered in cracked silt. The cracks went deep. The banks were crumbling. Junseok went down to the riverbed. He stuck his knife into the silt at the first spot, pulled it out, sniffed the blade, licked it. The girls exchanged glances. Mary snorted. He moved 10 paces to the left, stuck it in again, sniffed and licked it again. Then once more. At the 3rd spot, he stopped, crouched down, felt the silt with his fingers. Here, dig here, 1.20 meters deep, no more. Mary looked at him as if he were crazy. It's been dry here for 2 months. The river's gone. The river hasn't gone. It's hidden. Under this layer of clay is the water table. The water is right beneath you. Mary tapped her temple with her finger, but she started digging. They had no shovels. They poked at the ground with sharpened sticks and flat stones. Junseok dug alongside them. He quickly ran out of steam. The hands of a design engineer weren't used to physical labor. An hour later, he was sitting on the bank, breathing heavily. Mary dug without stopping. The muscles in her arms moved beneath her skin like ropes. She was thin from hunger, but strong by nature. A hunter. Those body remembered how to work even when the stomach was empty. 2 hours. 3. The sun rose and began to beat down. The girl in the grass-patterned apron brought them water. No, not water. Dew collected that morning in a wrung-out cloth. A few sips for each of them. Junseok refused his portion. Give it to Dahe, the one with the fever. The girl in the apron looked at him. For the first time that morning, she looked him straight in the eye. You know she's sick. I saw her last night. Fever, dehydration. She needs water more than I do." The girl nodded and left. 4 hours later, the tip of the stick made a slurping sound. Mary froze. She looked down. Water was flowing from beneath the clay. Not seeping, flowing. Dark, murky, but water. Real water. Mary stood knee-deep in the pit and watched as the water filled the hollow around her feet. Then she raised her head and looked at Junseok. Her face wore an expression he couldn't read, something between anger and astonishment. "How did you know?" Junseok sat on the edge of the pit and dangled his legs. The river wasn't cold. It went under a layer of clay. That happens when the topsoil bakes in the heat and a water-resistant layer remains beneath it. Water flows through it like through a pipe. You just have to know where to dig. Mary opened her mouth. Then she closed it. Then she said, "Where did you come from, landing on our heads like this?" Junseok almost smiled. From far away, very far away. By evening, they had lined the edges of the well with stones. The water had settled and become clear. Junseok tasted it first. Clean, no aftertaste. Cold, good water. He filled a pot and carried it back to camp. Rena was standing at the entrance. She hadn't gone down to the river. She hadn't gone to look. She stood and waited. When he set the pot down in front of her, she looked at the water, then at him, then back at the water. She sank to her knees, not to bow. Her legs had simply given way. She scooped up water with her palms and drank for a long time. Then she washed her face. Then she sat and was silent. Girls began to gather around her, one after another. They passed the pot from hand to hand and drank. Some laughed, some cried, some did both at the same time. Saren pressed the pot to her chest with both hands and drank so greedily that water ran down her chin onto her chest. A system window flashed before Junseok's eyes. +1 water source, bonus, 5 kilograms of cabbage and radish seeds, a clay pot, seed pot, a blueprint for a simple water mill. He blinked. A canvas bag appeared out of nowhere next to the fire pit. He walked over and untied it. Seeds, real ones, and a sheet of thick paper rolled into a tube with a blueprint. Rena walked over and looked at the sack. Where did this come from? Considered a bonus for a job well done. She didn't understand, but she didn't ask either. The girl in the apron approached him that evening. She introduced herself. Hannah Moon, herbalist, the only healer in the camp. She said she'd given Dahe some water, and Dahe had opened her eyes for the first time in 3 days. Then she fell silent. Then she asked, "How do you know about fever and dehydration?" Junseok didn't lie. "Where I come from, they teach us this. Boiled water, clean hands, these are the basics." Hannah looked at him, her ears twitching. She wanted to ask something else, but she didn't dare. Instead, she bowed briefly and left. On the morning of the 3rd day, Junseok gathered everyone. 34 girls sat in a semicircle. Rena sat separately, slightly to the side. Mary was gnawing on a dry stick. Saren sat next to Dahe, who was reclining but was already breathing more evenly. Junseok stood before them and drew on the ground with a stick. "First, we have water. That's settled. Now we need 3 things: warm houses, food, protection." He drew 3 circles, in that order. First, houses, then food, then protection. One of the girls spoke up. "Why not protection first?" "Because people frozen to death can't hold a sword." The girl fell silent. Junseok continued. "I saw clay by the river. Good clay, dense. You can make bricks out of it. Dry them in the sun for 3 days. Build walls out of the bricks. Make a roof out of poles and oiled cloth. A floor of packed earth. Run a chimney from the stove under the floor. Hot air will flow through the channel under the floor and warm the whole room from below." He looked at the faces in front of him. Confusion, skepticism, weariness. Rena stared at him without blinking. "It's called an undol, a heated floor. Every old woman back home knows what that is." He turned to Mary. "Mary, I need hunters. How many people do you have who can go into the woods?" Mary stopped chewing on her stick. 4, counting me." "Good. Meat and fish every day. Anything. Squirrels, frogs, birds, anything that moves." Mary nodded. That was her specialty. That was her language. He turned to Hannah. "Hannah, I need to know which plants around the camp are edible, which are medicinal, which are poisonous. Walk around the area within a 1-hour radius. Write down everything you find. Hana turned pale. Write down. We don't have paper. Use bark. Charcoal for ink. Hana nodded. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were clear. Then Junseok looked at the others, everyone who could stand on their own 2 feet. At dawn tomorrow, we're heading to the river. We'll mix clay and shape bricks. I'll show you how. A voice rang out from the back of the ranks. We are warriors, not peasant women. Junseok found the one who had spoken with his eyes. Tall, black-haired, a scar on her cheek. She looked at him with open hostility. We are the Moon Claws. We served the Queen. We won't be kneading mud on the orders of some vagabond. Silence. Rina didn't intervene. She watched. Junseok paused. What's your name? Nadi. Nadi. You're right. You are warriors. But a warrior who dies of hunger is not a warrior. He is a corpse. In 2 months, winter will be here. If you don't build houses and stock up on food, you will freeze to death. All 34 of you. And no one will know that you were proud, because no one remembers the dead. Nari clenched her fists. She wanted to say something, but Rina finally spoke up. Nari, sit down. Nari looked at her captain. Then she sat down. Rina stood up. She scanned the squad. 7 days. We'll give it 7 days. If we have a roof over our heads in a week, we'll continue. If not, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. Junseok nodded. By the evening of the 3rd day, 2 rows of wet bricks stood by the river, 120 of them. Junseok showed the girls how to mix clay with dry grass for strength, how to shape identical blocks by hand, how to lay them out in the sun to dry. He worked slower than everyone else. His hands were covered in calluses by lunchtime and bleeding by evening. Mary looked at his palms and snorted. An engineer then, an engineer. My hands are for drawings, not for clay. But there's nothing to draw on yet, she snorted. But that evening, when he wasn't looking, she brought a wide piece of birch bark and placed it next to his spot by the fire. The 4th day, the bricks were drying. Mary brought 2 hares and a duck. Hana walked through the woods and found wild sorrel and burdock roots. Junseok showed them how to make broth from bones and roots. The girls ate a hot meal for the first time in 2 months. Dahe sat alone, weak, pale, but she sat. Hana fed her broth with a spoon. Day 5, Junseok marked out the foundation for the first dugout. He chose a spot on a small hill so water wouldn't seep in. He drew a rectangle 3 by 5 meters. He showed them how to dig a trench around the perimeter, how to lay the first row of bricks, how to leave a channel for the chimney under the floor. 12 girls worked with him. The rest, whoever could stand on their feet, hauled stones and clay from the river. Nari worked in silence. Her face was stony, but she worked. In the evening, Junseok sat by the fire and drew on birch bark, a chimney blueprint, draft calculations, the angle of the flue for even heating. Eula approached quietly. He didn't notice her until she sat down beside him. White hair, blue eyes behind mountain crystal glasses, cat-like and ears pale gray, almost transparent. She looked at the drawing, silently, for a long time. Then she held out a finger and pointed to the place where the flue turned. There'll be a blockage here. The smoke won't go through. You need to make the turn smoother. Junseok turned to her. She was right. He looked at her more closely. You know your stuff. I'm a craftswoman. Eula so. I made locks and mechanisms in Songhwa's workshop. Chimneys are just pipes. I understand pipes. Junseok nodded slowly. Then he handed her a piece of charcoal. Show me how you'd do it. Eula took the charcoal. Her fingers were slender and precise. She corrected the sketch with 3 lines. It was elegant, simpler and better than his version. Junseok looked at her, and for the first time in 4 days felt something akin to relief. He wasn't alone. There were people here who knew how to think with their hands. Eula, tomorrow you're coming with me to the construction site. I need your hands and your eyes. Eula didn't smile, but her ears perked up slightly. For cats, that was like a smile. On the 6th day, the walls of the first dugout had risen a meter. The bricks had dried in the sun and were hard as stone. The clay mixed with grass held its shape. Junseok supervised the bricklaying. Eula kept an eye on the chimney. 12 girls hauled bricks from the river and passed them up. Work proceeded in 3 shifts. While some were building, others were mixing new clay. A 3rd group rested. No one sat idle. No one duplicated someone else's work. Junseok wrote the schedule on birch bark and hung it on a tree at the camp entrance. Everyone knew what to do in the morning and what to do in the evening. Mary came back from the forest every day with game, 2 hares, 3 birds. Once she carried a young deer on her back. She dropped the carcass by the fire and looked at Junseok. He nodded. Good. She turned away, but her tail swayed from side to side like a pendulum. On the 7th day, the roof was ready. Poles made of dry tree trunks, oiled cloth on top. The chimney was built of stones and clay. The stove stood by the entrance. The flue ran under the floor in a zigzag from one wall to the other. Junseok laid kindling and dry grass in the stove. He lit it. The smoke rose evenly, without any blockage. Yula stood nearby and watched. An hour later, the floor was warm, not hot, warm, as if a living creature were lying beneath it. Junseok placed his palm on the packed clay. It works. Yula placed her palm next to his. It works. They exchanged glances. Rena stepped inside. She stood in the middle of the dugout. The ceiling was low, and she had to tilt her head slightly. She stood there for a moment. Then she slowly sank to the floor. She pressed her palms against the warm clay and laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was nervous, like someone who had forgotten what warmth felt like and suddenly remembered. She sat on the floor and laughed and couldn't stop. Mary peeked inside. "Captain, are you okay?" Rena covered her mouth with her hand. She looked at Mary, then at Junseok. Then she said, 7 days. You did it in 7 days. I built 1 dugout. We need 7 more. 4 people in each, plus a communal kitchen, plus a storage shed, plus an infirmary. Rena stood up. She squared her shoulders. Something in her had changed. Something invisible yet palpable. As if someone inside her had lit a fire that had long since gone out. "Tell me what to do." Junseok took out the birch bark with the schedule. He began to explain. Parallel processes. While one group builds the 2nd dugout, another starts the 3rd. The 3rd group prepares bricks for future use. The 4th clears the site for a vegetable garden. He explained, and Rena listened. She really listened. Not like a soldier being forced to dig in the dirt, like a commander who has received a new order and understands its meaning. That evening, Saren fell asleep in the dugout on the warm floor. She lay curled up like a kitten, 2 tails wrapped around her body. Her breathing was steady. Her face was calm. For the first time in months, she slept so soundly that she didn't wake up when Hana covered her with a cloak. Junseok stood at the entrance and watched her. Then he went outside. He looked at the sky with 2 moons, then at his hands. Calluses, scrapes, foreign clay under his fingernails. He was an engineer who didn't know how to do anything with his hands. But in 7 days, those hands found water and built a house. Not his hands, the hands of these girls. He only showed them where to dig and how to stack the stones. That was his true strength. He didn't build himself. He built through others. And that was stronger than any sword. The 8th day began with a problem. Nari brought a group of 7 girls to him. They stood with stony faces. Nari crossed her arms over her chest. "We are not slaves. We will not build houses like servants. We are the moon claws. We are trained in combat. Give us real work." Junseok looked at them. 7. Almost a quarter of all the fighters. If they stopped work, construction will stop. He could have said that building was real work. He could have said that without houses, they would die. He had already said that. It hadn't worked. Nari hadn't heard those words. She had heard only one thing. "We are warriors." Junseok nodded. "All right, you're warriors. Then here's your assignment." He took out a birch bark and began to draw a map of the area around the camp, 20 points along the perimeter. "I need reconnaissance. Go around the entire perimeter, check every point. Are there any tracks? Whose? How many? Where do they lead? Where they're coming from? Report back to me tonight." Nari raised an eyebrow. "That's patrolling. That's guarding the camp. Exactly what you were trained to do. Or am I wrong?" Nari looked at the map, then at her people. Then she took the birch bark and left, without saying a word. Mary approached him afterward. You're cunning. Not cunning. Practical. I really need reconnaissance. I don't know what's around us. What kind of animals? What kind of people? Are there any roads? Mary nodded. I can tell you this. There's a road to the northeast. An old one. Overgrown, but a road. I saw wagon tracks. Where it leads? I don't know. I didn't go far. We'll find out. That evening, Nari reported. Boot tracks on the southwestern border. 5 people, heavy set, with horses. They passed through 2 days ago. They didn't go into the forest but walked along the edge, as if they were checking. Rena raised her head. Velgar patrols. They know we're here. They know. They've known for a long time. They're waiting. Waiting for what? For you to weaken. Hungry and cold captives are cheaper if they resist. Slave owners are patient. Silence. The girls exchanged glances. Mary clenched her fists. Let them just try. They won't try now. We have time, but not much. Junseok looked at Rena. Rena, how many of yours can fight? For real, Rena answered without a pause. 12, at full strength and armed. Now, after the starvation, maybe 8. Weapons. 1 sword, 3 knives, 2 axes for chopping. That won't be enough. I know. Junseok looked at Eula. Eula, have you ever made arrowheads? Eula adjusted her glasses. I've made locks with a 24-part mechanism. Arrowheads are child's play. All right, start tomorrow. We need 20 to begin with. Mary looked at him and smirked. Arrows without bows are useless. I know. We'll have a bow. Give me 10 days. Mary snorted. 10 days, he says. Just like a construction site. Junseok smirked. This is a construction site. Just a different kind of project. By the end of the 2nd week, 3 dugouts stood. A 4th was in the works. The vegetable garden was laid out. Cabbage and radish seeds were planted in furrows covered with oiled cloth for warmth. Junseok explained the greenhouse effect. The cloth lets light through, but traps heat. Just like glass, only we don't have glass. Eula looked up. Not yet. He looked at her. She wasn't joking. Hana had set up a makeshift infirmary in the corner of the first dugout. Shelves made of poles, pots of herbal decoctions, clean rags boiled in a pot over the fire. Junseok taught her to boil water for treating wounds and sterilizing instruments. She looked at him with an expression as if he had revealed the secret of the universe to her. Boiled water kills germs. It's called sterilization. I don't know the word sterilization. Now you do. Hana wrote it down on birch bark, with charcoal, in neat handwriting. She kept records of everything. Which herbs for fever, which for pain, which ones for inflammation. For the first time in her life, she was doing this systematically, not from memory, from her notes. And for the first time, she saw that her decisions worked, not by chance, but according to a pattern. Dahe was recovering. The fever broke on the 4th day after the water appeared. On the 10th, she got up. On the 14th, she was helping at the construction site. She turned out to be quiet and tenacious. She carried bricks in silence and didn't complain. Saren never left her side. The 2 youngest in the unit. They clung to each other like sisters. On the night of the 14th day, Junseok sat alone by the fire. Everyone was asleep. He stared at the flames and thought. 2 weeks. Water. 3 houses. A vegetable garden. An infirmary. 20 arrowheads. A patrol system. By the standards of his past life, it was a dismal pace. By the standards of this world, it was a miracle. The system window flashed before his eyes. Settlement progress. Residents. 34. Food supply. 12 days. Infrastructure. 8%. Morale. Low. 8%. 2 months until winter. Food supply. 12 days. Morale. Low. He closed his eyes. Mom. It's more complicated here than the apartment complex in Gimpo. But it's okay. We'll figure it out. Then he opened his eyes because he heard footsteps. Rena stepped out of the darkness. She sat down next to him, silently. She stared at the fire for a long time. Then she said, "You're not sleeping." "Neither are you." She didn't answer. A minute later she spoke. 6 months ago, I commanded 300 men, the best warriors of the Naira clan. We guarded the queen. They called us the Moon Claws because we went out at night and our blades glinted in the moonlight. She fell silent. Then she continued. Minister Che Gyung-hye. He was the husband of the queen's youngest daughter. Quiet, polite, always smiling. No one noticed how he bribed half the guard, how he placed his own men at every post. When he poisoned the queen, we didn't even have time to draw our swords. His men were already inside. They killed 260 of my sisters in a single night. 60 of the remaining ones swore allegiance to him. 34 left with me. We were declared traitors. They branded us with the mark of exile. We were banished here, to the gray forest, where nothing grows and no one cares about a bunch of stray cats. She looked at her hands, at the brand seared into her wrist. For 6 months, I thought of only one thing: how to get back and kill him. Every night I fell asleep with his name on my tongue. Every morning I woke up and counted. How many of us were left? How many more could stand? How many days until we all died here? And then you came and started digging a well. She turned to him. Her green eyes glistened in the light of the fire. Why? Junseok didn't answer right away. He was thinking, not about pretty words, about the truth. Because I'm an engineer, I see a problem and solve it. You were dying. That was a problem. I decided to start with water. Rena looked at him. You're a strange man, Seo Junseok. Maybe. She stood up. She stood there for a moment. Then she said quietly, "Thank you for the warmth," and she walked off into the darkness. On the 15th day, Junseok was building a forge. Not a real forge. A pit in the ground lined with stones, with clay walls and an opening for the bellows. Eula had made the bellows from the skin of a deer that Mary had brought 3 days earlier. 2 planks, the hide between them, a valve made of thin birch bark at the bottom, the simplest of designs. But it worked. Air flowed into the pit and the coals blazed white hot. Junseok stood nearby and watched. Eula pumped the bellows. Her white hair was pulled back. Her glasses glinted with the fire's reflections. She pumped evenly and rhythmically, like a metronome. The coals were breathing. The temperature was rising. Junseok placed a piece of bog iron, which Nari had found while on patrol, into the heat. A brown stone the size of a fist. Ore. Poor quality. With impurities. But ore. They waited. Eula pumped. The stone changed color. Brown. Red. Orange. Then it began to soften. Junseok pulled it out with tongs made of 2 sticks wrapped in wet leather. He placed it on a flat stone. He began to strike it with another stone. Once, twice, 3 times. Sparks flew. The metal spread out. The impurities separated. It wasn't a sword. It was a shapeless lump of hot iron. But it was iron. From the earth. With their own hands. Eula looked at the lump on the stone. Then she looked at Junseok. You knew the stone would turn into iron. It's ore. Bog iron. When you heat it up enough, it releases the metal. Next you have to hammer it to drive out the slag. Then hammer it some more to shape it. Eula held out her hand. Can I? He handed her the tongs. She took the red-hot lump. She turned it over. She looked at it from all sides. Then she began to hammer. Not like him, not roughly, precisely. Every blow in the right spot, at the right angle. 20 minutes later, the shapeless lump had become a plate, smooth, uniform in thickness, without cracks. Junseok watched her hands. A craftswoman, a true craftswoman. Her hands knew metal as well as he knew blueprints. Eula held the plate up to the light, fragile. It would shatter after the 3rd blow. It needs hardening, I know. Heat it until it's red hot and plunge it into water, quickly. Eula looked at him. In water, not in oil. In water for hardness, in oil for flexibility. Arrowheads need hardness. They don't need to bend, they need to pierce. Eula heated the plate. She dipped it into a pot of water. The water hissed. Steam shot upward. She took out the plate. She tapped it with a stone. The sound changed. It had been dull. Now it was ringing. Eula looked at Junseok. Her eyes were such that for a second he forgot where he was. You know why this works. Water cools metal quickly. Rapid cooling fixes the structure. The metal grains don't have time to grow and remain fine. Fine grains mean hardness. Eula was silent. Then she sat down on the ground. She pressed the iron plate against her cheek. She closed her eyes. She sat like that for a minute. Junseok didn't interfere. He understood. This was the moment when a craftsman gains new knowledge, when the world expands, when the hands can suddenly do what they couldn't a minute ago. This is a sacred moment. It must not be interrupted. Eula opened her eyes. How much more do you know? A lot. Not everything, but enough so that your hands will never be idle. Eula stood up. Show me. They worked until nightfall. By the morning of the 16th day, 8 arrowheads lay on the stone, rough, uneven, but sharp, and capable of piercing leather armor from 20 paces away. Mary picked one up. She turned it over in her fingers. She attached it to a shaft she had carved herself. She drew the bowstring. She didn't ask for permission. She just walked out of the camp and returned a minute later with the arrowhead sticking out of a tree trunk 30 paces away. It's holding, Junseok nodded. Mary, I need something from you. She turned. Show me how you shoot, how you draw the string, what kind of grip, what's your draw weight. I need to see this. Why? Because I want to make you a bow. Not a hunting bow made of a stick and sinew, a real bow, tailored to you, to your height, to your arms, to your draw weight. Mary blinked, her tail froze, then it began to twitch rapidly from side to side. You're joking. I never joke about weapons. Mary looked at him, then she turned away sharply. Then she said without turning around, in a hoarse voice, Fine, watch, I'll show you. She shot for him for half an hour. He recorded everything on birch bark, the draw length, the grip width, the height of the aiming point, the angle of her shoulder. Mary shot, and he watched not the target, but her body, at the movement of her muscles, at how she breathes before the shot, at how she freezes, at how she releases the bowstring. She noticed his gaze and blushed. Her tail stood straight up. What are you looking at? Memorizing. She snorted and turned away, but she kept shooting. On the 17th day, Junseok began building a bow. Eula helped. The base was made of 2 types of wood, hard on the outside for resilience, soft on the inside for flexibility. The layers were glued together with resin and wrapped in sinew. He wasn't a master bowmaker. He was an engineer who understood the physics of tension and elasticity, the difference between a simple and a compound bow, the principles of levers and energy storage. Eula transformed his knowledge into an object. Her fingers did what his mind conceived. On the 20th day, the bow was ready. Mary held it in her hands and said nothing. It was a beautiful bow. Eula had carved the wood and inlaid the grip with pieces of redwood. The color matched Mary's hair. It was no accident. Junseok had asked Eula to do this. Mary pulled the string taut. She released it. She pulled it taut again. Her fingers rested on the grip as if on something familiar, like a friend's hand. Because the bow was made for her hand, for her body, for her breath. Mary shot. The arrow flew with a sound Junseok had never heard before, clear, high-pitched, like singing. The arrow struck a tree trunk 50 paces away and sank halfway in. Mary lowered the bow. She looked at him. Her eyes were wet. Her freckles darkened on her flushed face. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then said, There's something written here, on the handle. What is it? Korean symbols. For the one who brings home. Mary turned away. Her shoulders were shaking. Mary, shut up. Just shut up for a minute. Junseok fell silent. Mary stood with her back to him and cried. Then she wiped her face with her sleeve. She turned around. Her eyes were red. Her tail was swaying from side to side. If you tell anyone I was crying, I'll hit you with this bow. Deal. She left, with quick steps, clutching the bow to her chest with both hands. Eula stood nearby and watched her go. You specifically asked me to make the handle red. Yes. Why? Because she's been given weapons her whole life. No one has ever given her a weapon made just for her. There's a difference. Eula took off her glasses, wiped them, put them back on. Then she said quietly, Will you make something for me too? I have something better for you. Blueprints. Eula looked at him. Her ears perked up. What kind of blueprints? A watermill, a loom, a lathe, a lifting mechanism. I have a lot of them, and I can't build a single one without you. Eula stood there and looked at him. Then she said, Show me. He unfolded the blueprint for the watermill, the very one the system had generated. Eula looked at it the way other people look at a sunset, silently, holding her breath, with an expression of absolute bliss on her face. This wheel, which the water turns. Yes, the river's current pushes the blades turn the axle transmits the rotation through a gear to the millstone grinds the grain, without hands, without effort. The water does the work for us. Eula pressed the blueprint to her chest. Her hands were trembling. When do we start? Tomorrow. No, today. She took the blueprint and left. Junseok watched her go. He was smiling. 3 weeks. Water. A home. A garden. A smithy. Weapons. And now people who believe. Not everyone, but enough. The system window flashed. Settlement progress. Infrastructure 14%. Morale. Average. 14% and average morale. He remembered the construction site in Paju. The first month was the hardest. Then momentum kicked in. Then the processes picked up speed. Then the project began to grow on its own. Because people understood the system, understood the rhythm, understood that every day brings results. It would be the same here. He could feel it. On the evening of the 20th day, Rina approached him. She was more serious than usual. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." Nari returned from patrol. "New tracks in the southwest. The same 5. But now there are 10 more with them. And they've set up camp, a 3-hour walk away. They're not just watching anymore. They're preparing." Junseok wasn't surprised. He'd been expecting this. Smoke from a forge, the sounds of construction. In a dead forest where nothing should be, it was like a signal fire. Rina continued. 15 armed men, swords, crossbows, leather armor. Nari says they're not a regular army, mercenaries, most likely from the Black Sapphire Guild, slave traders. They won't storm the place. They'll wait until nightfall and try to surround us. How much time? Nari thinks 3 or 4 days. They're still gathering their forces. Junseok nodded. 4 days. He could work with 4 days. Rina, gather the council. In the evening, Rina, Mary, Eula, Hana, and Nari sat around the campfire. Saren came too. No one tried to shoo her away. Junseok was drawing on birch bark, a map of the area. The camp in the center, the river to the north, the forest to the east and west, open space to the south. They'll come from the south, open ground, easy to approach. Rina nodded. We'll post lookouts. Not just that. Junseok drew lines. Here, between the camp and the southern edge of the forest, we'll dig a trench, not deep, knee-deep, but wide, sharp stakes at the bottom. We'll cover it with branches and dry leaves. You can't see it at night. A trench is good, but 15 people could climb over it. Not if they're running in the dark and don't know it's there. And behind the ditch, 8 archers will stand with new bows, with new arrowheads that pierce the skin. At a distance they choose themselves. Rina looked at the map, then at Junseok. You thought about this in advance, from day 1. Rina leaned back. She looked at him with a long gaze. Then, for the first time in all these days, she said what he hadn't expected. All right, you're in charge. 4 days, the 21st through the 24th. The camp turned into a hive of activity. Junseok divided everyone into 3 groups. The first, under Nari's command, dug a trench, 2 meters wide, knee-deep. At the bottom, sharpened stakes made from dry tree trunks. On top, thin branches, dry leaves, dust. In the dark, it looked like ordinary forest litter. The second group, led by Mary, carved bows. Not like Mary's own, simpler, from a single piece of wood, without inlay, but with a good bowstring made of deer tendons. 8 bows in 3 days. Eula made arrowheads without stopping. The workshop operated from dawn to dusk. By the end of the 3rd day, they had 40 arrowheads and 30 finished arrows. The third group, led by Rina herself, was training. 8 archers, 4 swordswomen. Rina pushed them as hard as in the old days, running, stretching, target practice, sparring with sticks. The girls were weaker than they had been 6 months ago. The hunger had not passed without a trace, but they remembered. Their bodies remembered. Their muscles remembered. Rina remembered. She stood before them straight as a blade, and her voice rang with steel. We are the moon claws. They broke us. They burned us. They drove us. But we stand, and when they come, we'll show them why they feared us. Day 22. Junseok sat by the fire with Eula, designing yet another thing. Torches, not ordinary ones, on sticks with rags soaked in resin and fat. They burned brightly and for a long time. 20 torches, stuck into the ground in a line along the moat. Why? Eula asked. The light from the torches will blind them. They'll be walking from darkness into light. Our archers will stand behind the torches, shooting from the darkness at illuminated targets. Eula raised an eyebrow. Have you ever fought? No, but I know what it's like to light a worksite during the night shift. The principle is the same. Eula snorted quietly. Then she raised her head. We can do better. How? Ropes, stretched at ankle height in front of the moat. You can't see them in the dark. They'll trip, fall, into the moat, onto the stakes. Junseok looked at her. Eula, that is effective. Yes. They stretched the ropes on the 23rd day, thin ones, made of woven grass, between the trees, a palm's width above the ground, in 3 rows. The 24th day, evening, everything was ready. The moat, the stakes, torches, ropes, archers in position behind the line of torches, swordswomen in reserve behind the dugouts, Hana in the infirmary with boiled water and clean bandages, Saren and those who couldn't fight inside the farthest dugout. Junseok stood on a low hill behind the camp. Rena stood beside him. She was in full gear, a sword at her belt, her hair pulled back into a tight knot, her eyes unblinking, her body like a spring. They'll come at night. Yes. How do you know? Mercenaries always come at night. They're counting on panic, on people sleeping, on chaos. They don't know we're ready. Rena looked at the line of torches, at the moat, invisible in the twilight, at the silhouettes of the archers behind the trees. They don't know. The sun had set. 2 moons had risen into the sky, white and gold. The camp fell silent. Not a single fire in the dugouts, not a sound. 34 girls and 1 engineer waited in the darkness. Junseok's breathing was steady. His hands didn't tremble. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't on a construction site. He was at the facility. Everything was in place. Everything had been calculated. Everything was on schedule. His job was done. Now it was Rena's turn. Now it was Mary's turn and her archers. Now it was the turn of those he couldn't replace and didn't try to. He was an engineer, not a warrior. He had set the stage. They would play out their part on it. They had arrived an hour before dawn. Nari was the first to notice. An owl's hoot, 3 times. The agreed-upon signal. Then a second hoot. Closer. Junseok saw them from the hill, shadows against the backdrop of the forest. 15. No, more. He counted. 18. 3 new ones. They were moving in a semicircle, quietly, professionally, crossbows at the ready, swords drawn. They were approaching the camp from the south, just as he'd predicted. Open ground, easy approach. They didn't notice the first row of ropes. The first one fell silently. Branches snapped. He cursed under his breath. The second one tripped over it. The third went around it, but lost his pace. Their line broke. The semicircle turned into a heap. They were still walking, not running, walking, more carefully. Who up front whispered a command. They regrouped, set off again. 10 steps remained to the ditch. Junseok turned to Rena. Rena stood motionless. She was looking at the shadows, counting. Then she nodded. Torches. 8 torches flared up simultaneously. A line of fire sliced through the darkness. The light blinded the mercenaries. They froze for a second. Just 1 second. That was enough. The ones in front saw the ditch too late. 2 fell onto the spikes. A scream. Another tried to jump over. He didn't make it. The rest stopped. Rena let out a cry. A single sound. Short, sharp, like a bark. 8 bowstrings sang out at once. Arrows flew from the darkness past the torches. The mercenaries stood in the light, illuminated, visible, targets. 3 fell at once. 2 grabbed each other's arms and legs. The arrows pierced the leather armor. Eula's arrowheads held firm. Mary shot faster than anyone else. 3 arrows in the time it took the others to fire 1. Each found its mark. The mercenaries tried to retreat. They ran back, into the darkness, into the ropes. 2 more fell. They got tangled up. They rolled across the ground. The arrows found them. The mercenary commander, a burly man in chainmail. He was shouting orders, gathering his men, trying to organize a retreat. Rena looked at Mary. Mary saw him. She drew her bow, that very one, with the red handle, with the inscription in Korean. The arrow flew with that same clear, high-pitched sound. The commander flinched. The arrow entered his shoulder, between the chainmail and the shoulder guard. He collapsed to 1 knee. His men ran. They didn't retreat. They ran. Into the forest, into the darkness, throwing down their weapons. 10 minutes later, it was all over. 6 men lay on the field in front of the moat. 3 dead, 3 wounded. The rest had fled. The Moonclaws had lost no one. Not a scratch. Not a single one. Rena stood by the line of torches and looked out at the field. Then she turned to Junseok. Her face was inscrutable, but her eyes were different. They were burning. Not with anger, not with pride, with he couldn't name. You gave us time. No, I gave you a position. You took the time yourselves. Mary approached, bow in hand, tail swaying from side to side, blood on her face. Not her own, someone else's. Splatters. She was alive. Absolutely and completely alive. Since she hadn't been alive for 6 months. 6 on the ground, 12 gone. They'll return. They'll return. With greater force. But not tomorrow, and not in a week. We bought time. Rena looked at the wounded mercenaries. What about them? Junseok approached them. 3, arrows in their legs and arms. 1 was moaning. two were silent. They looked at him with hatred and fear. Hana emerged from behind the trees, a white apron, clean hands, a pot of boiled water, bandages. She approached the wounded, looked at them, then at Junseok. Treat them. Nari took a step forward. These are enemies. These are prisoners. There's a difference. Nari clenched her teeth, but she stepped back. Hana knelt down next to the first wounded man. Her hands didn't tremble. She pulled out the arrow. She cleaned the wound, bandaged it. The mercenary stared at her with his mouth agape. The girl with cat ears, who 5 minutes ago was supposed to be his prey, was now saving his life. In the morning, Junseok interrogated the prisoners, not himself, through Rina. Rina knew how to ask questions so that people answered not out of pain, but out of fear. She didn't need to hit them. It was enough for her to look. They told him, Baron Haldar Morn, governor of the Velgar borderlands, the king's bastard. He knew about the camp. He'd known for a long time. At first he waited, then he saw the smoke, then he heard about the water, then he hired them. The Black Sapphire Guild, slave traders, 34 young cat girls, good merchandise, high price. But the mercenary commander added something else. Morn doesn't just want you, he's afraid, because you're doing what no one here has done in 2,000 years. You made the dead earth yield water. That scares people more than an army. Junseok sat and listened. Then he stood up. Then he turned to Rina. Let them go. Rina raised an eyebrow. Let them return to Morn. Let them tell him what happened here. Let them tell him that the Moonclaws are alive, armed, and that attacking us costs more than trading with us. Rina looked at him. You want the enemy to know our strength. I want the enemy to know our price. Rina was silent. Then she nodded. They were released in the morning, with their wounds bandaged, with water for the road, and with a message, a verbal one, because Morn might not have read a written one, a message that Rina delivered personally, looking the mercenary commander in the eye. Tell your master, we're standing here, we're not going anywhere, and next time, we won't let the wounded go. We'll let the caravan go with the goods he wants to buy. The mercenaries left, limping, looking back, unable to believe they were being let go. Junseok stood next to Rina and watched them leave. Rina turned to him. You're taking a risk. I always take risks. It's called an investment. You invest trust. You gain a bargaining position. Rina shook her head. You're definitely not from this world. The camp was buzzing. The girls were cleaning up the field, gathering arrows, pulling bodies out of the ditch. Nari was supervising the cleanup of the area. Mary was checking and counting the arrows. Eula was inspecting the arrowheads for damage. Hana was bandaging minor scrapes on those who had been scratched by the stakes during training. Saren stepped out of the dugout and stood in the middle of the camp. She watched it all with wide eyes, 2 tails wrapped around her waist, her hands pressed against her chest. She walked over to Junseok, tugged at his sleeve. He leaned down. We won. Yes, we won. She looked up at him. Then she hugged him, silently, tightly. She clung to his t-shirt with both hands and stood like that. She didn't cry. She just stood there and held on, because she needed to make sure he was real, that all of this was real, that the water and the homes and the warm floor and the victory, that this wasn't a dream from which she would wake up back in the hungry, cold camp where there was nothing but 6 dried fish for 34 people. Junseok placed his hand on her head, between her 2 silver ears. We've only just begun. The system window flashed. Bonus for successful defense. Received 200 kilograms of iron ore. Basic blacksmith's tool set, blueprint for a small blast furnace, 10 kilograms of wheat seeds, 200 kilograms of iron ore, real blacksmithing tools, blueprint for a blast furnace, wheat seeds. Junseok looked at the system window and thought. 3 weeks ago, he had been lying in a ravine under 2 moons, not knowing where he was. Now he stood in the middle of a settlement of 5 dugouts with heated floors, with a well, with a smithy, with a vegetable garden, with an armed unit that had just defeated an enemy 3 times their size without suffering any losses, with people who believed in him. He looked up at the sky. Mom, things here are more complicated than I thought, but the project is growing. Then he looked at the radish sticking out of the garden bed, green, alive, in a dead forest where nothing had grown for 2,000 years. It was growing too fast, 3 times faster than normal. He chalked it up to his crop rotation, to proper watering, to the greenhouse effect. But at night, when everyone was asleep, Saren spoke in her sleep. She saw a white cat, a huge one, lying under the roots of the trees. The cat was listening. The cat was waiting. The cat was smiling. Junseok didn't know that. Not yet. But the ground beneath his feet was warmer than it should have been, and the seeds were sprouting faster than they could, and the water in the well wasn't running out, even though 34 people drank from it every day. Something was awakening beneath the gray forest. Something ancient. Something patient. Something had been waiting for 2,000 years. And for the first time in all that time, it sensed that its land was being cared for again. The camp successfully repelled a night attack by 18 mercenaries from the Black Sapphire Guild without a single casualty, thanks to a system of ditches and ambushes. The prisoners were released with a message to Baron Morn, expressing a willingness to trade. The system yielded a large bounty, including iron ore and wheat seeds, and beneath the gray forest, the ancient feline deity Hogyon began to awaken. The morning of the 25th began with a scent. Junseok woke up and didn't immediately realize what had changed. Then he understood. The air smelled of earth, not the dry, dead dust that had been here since day one. Living earth, moist, like after rain, though there had been no rain. He stepped out of the dugout and stopped. At the edge of the garden, radish sprouts were poking out of the ground, green, bright, as tall as a palm. Last night they had been ankle high. Overnight they had doubled in height. Junseok crouched down. He touched the leaves, firm, juicy, healthy. He looked at the cabbage patch, the same thing. Sprouts that were supposed to be barely visible were bursting from the ground as if they'd been watered with fertilizer from the future. He stood up and looked around, along the perimeter of the camp, on the trees, on those very same dead gray trunks that stood as bare skeletons. Buds were swelling on the lower branches, not on all of them, on the 3 or 4 closest to the garden, small, pale green, barely visible, but they were there. In a forest where nothing had grown for 2,000 years. Junseok stood and watched. Then he said quietly, "This isn't crop rotation. Crop rotation doesn't work like that." He didn't know what was happening, but he knew it was good. Whatever it was on their side. He decided not to think about it now. There were more important things to do. 200 kilograms of iron ore lay in a neat pile by the forge. A toolbox stood nearby, a hammer, pliers, a chisel, a punch, a mandrel. All simple, all functional. Eula was already there. She was sitting in front of the box, sorting through the tools. She picked each one up, weighed it, checked the balance, ran her fingers over it. She didn't notice him approaching. He cleared his throat. She didn't turn around. Wait. He waited. A minute later, she stood up. Her eyes were shining. "This is workable." "Good, because I have a blueprint for a blast furnace and 10 kilograms of wheat seeds that I have nothing to grind them with." Eula looked at him. A mill. A mill. They started that very day. Junseok unfolded the blueprint for a water mill. Eula studied it for 2 hours. She asked questions. How the gear works. Why the blades are angled. Why there's a gap between the millstones. Junseok answered. Sometimes he didn't know the exact answer and spoke honestly. "I don't know. Try it." Eula nodded and tried. She carved the first gear out of wood in 4 days. Rough, with uneven teeth, but it worked. The whole camp helped assemble the wheel. 8 spokes made from dry tree trunks. A rim made of bent planks. Blades made of flat stones bound with birch bark. The structure was ugly, crooked, but when they set it on the axle over the stream that now flowed from the well into the ravine, the wheel turned. Slowly, with a creak, but it turned. The water pushed the blades turned the axle. The axle, via a gear, rotated the upper millstone. The millstone scraped against the lower stone. Eula stood and watched. She stood there so long that Mary walked over and nudged her in the shoulder. "Hey, you're here." Eula didn't answer. She looked at the wheel the way others look at a miracle. Then she sat down on the ground. She took off her glasses, pressed them to her chest, and laughed. Quietly, soundlessly, pressing her palm to her mouth. Mary looked at Junseok. "What's wrong with her?" "She's happy," Mary snorted. "A strange way to be happy." "No, the right one." The mill was working, poorly, unevenly. The gears creaked, the millstones ground the grain, not into flour, but into coarse crumbs. But it worked. Junseok cooked the first handful of wheat groats into porridge, thick, with water, with wild onions that Hana had found by the stream. 34 bowls, hot porridge, wheat, the first time in 6 months of exile. Rena ate in silence, then she set down her bowl, then she stood up and left. Mary watched her go. She returned 10 minutes later. Her eyes were red, but her back was straight. She sat down and finished her porridge. No one said a word. The 30th day, a month. Junseok stood on the hill and looked at what had been a camp and was now becoming something else. 7 dugouts, a smithy, a mill, a vegetable garden with 3 beds, a stone-lined well, a smokehouse made of stone and clay where Mary smoked venison, a drying shed under a canopy where fish was cured, a storage shed with 18 days' worth of supplies. The system window showed infrastructure 22%, morale high, population 34, 18 days' worth of food, 22% for the month. It was little, and it was incredible. At the morning planning meeting, he explained the next step. We need trade. Mary raised her hand. Trade with whom? With people. There's a road to the northeast. You said it yourself. The road leads somewhere. To a village, to a town, to a market. We make things that can be sold. Sauerkraut, smoked meat, dried fish, arrowheads. Nari snorted. We'll go trade with people. We, outcast beastfolk with brands on our wrists. Yeah, because people have things we don't. Salt, iron, cloth, grain. And we have what they don't. Mary answered first. Smoked venison with Hana's herbs. Exactly. Rena was silent. She was thinking. Then she said, I'll go with the caravan. No, Mary will go. Rena raised an eyebrow. Why not me? Because you're the captain. You're a symbol. If the captain of the Moonclaws goes to trade at the market, it looks like desperation. If a hunter brings game to trade, it looks like business. Rena clenched her jaw, but she nodded. Mary smirked. Finally, my job. Nari will go with you, as a guard. Nari lifted her head. For the first time in a month, there was something resembling approval on her face. The caravan set out on the 32nd day. Caravan is a bit of an exaggeration. Mary, Nari, 2 girls from the patrol group, a cart made of poles on wooden wheels that Eula had carved in 2 days. On the cart, 20 heads of sauerkraut in clay pots, 10 bundles of smoked venison, 5 bundles of dried fish, 10 arrowheads, 2 wooden spoons that Eula had carved out of boredom and that were more beautiful than anything within a 100-kilometer radius. They returned 3 days later. Mary walked ahead. The tail stuck out like a pipe. On the cart lay 2 sacks of salt, a sack of barley, a roll of coarse cloth, a coil of iron wire, and something else. Information. Mary told us while sitting by the fire and chewing on dried meat. The village is called Talon, a 2-hour walk to the northeast. A human village, about 100 residents, poor. They live worse than we do. No smithy, no mill. They grind grain by hand with stones. They eat porridge and soups. They hardly ever see meat. When we laid out the smoked venison at the village head's house, his eyes got as big as my fists. Rena listened. And what do they know about us? They know that someone lives in the gray forest. They're afraid. They think we're cursed, or spirits, or worse. But when they tasted the sauerkraut, they stopped being afraid. Junseok nodded. Spirits don't make sauerkraut. Mary snorted. That's exactly what the village head said, word for word. And a few... Mary grew serious. They know about Baron Morn. They fear him. They pay tribute. Every 3 months his men come and take 1/3 of the harvest. If you don't give it up, they take people. Silence. Rena clenched her fists. Slavery. They don't call it that, but yes. Junseok stared into the fire. Baron Morn, governor of the borderlands, slave trader, the man who controls everything around them, the man who has already sent mercenaries and lost, the man who will be thinking about what to do next. Rena turned to him. What are you planning? You look like a cat that spotted a mouse. Junseok looked at her, and for the first time since the transfer,
An expression appeared on his face that Rena later described to Mary as frightening. Not evil, not cheerful, calculating. I plan to make Baron mourn unnecessary. How? We'll become the ones people come to for goods, not him. Us. Talene buys from us. Other villages do too. We give them better and cheaper than Morn. His chain is breaking.
His power doesn't rest on swords. It rests on the fact that he's the only middleman between the villages and the city. Remove the middleman, and there's no one to pay for the swords. Rena leaned back. It's a long game, yes, but we're in no hurry. Winter will be long, and in winter, people especially value those who can give them food and warmth. Winter arrived on the 45th day. It didn't creep up, it struck. The first snow fell at night, and by morning it was ankle deep. The temperature plummeted. The north wind cut into their faces. The gray forest turned white. The dead trees were cloaked in snow and looked like skeletons in shrouds, but it was warm in the dugouts. The ondol was working. The stoves were stoked with dry firewood they'd stockpiled 3 weeks before the snow. The chimneys drew evenly. The floor was warm, not hot, warm, as if alive. 34 girls slept in the warmth. They ate hot food. They drank clean water. No one was sick. No one was dying. 45 days ago, 6 of them couldn't stand. Now everyone was on their feet. Kana kept records. Every day. Each girl's weight, temperature, complaints. She had a birch bark journal bound with thread, 20 pages, neat handwriting. She showed it to Junseok on the 46th day. The average weight had increased by 3 kilograms in a month. Not a single case of fever in the last 2 weeks. Cuts are healing faster. She stood before him, holding the journal with both hands. Her hands weren't shaking. For the first time since they'd met, Hana's hands were completely still. It works. The records, the observations, the system. It works. I'm not guessing anymore. I know. Junseok nodded. It's called evidence-based medicine. Hana wrote the words on the cover of the journal. Then she looked at him and said quietly, "Thank you, Son Sionnim." She still stuttered, but less often. On the 48th day, Eula finished the blast furnace, a small one, 2 meters 20 centimeters tall, clay and stone, 2 openings for the bellows, 1 for slag discharge. She worked on it for 10 days. She calculated the slope of the walls herself based on the blueprint. She selected the stones for the refractory lining herself. She made the clay nozzle herself. When the furnace was lit for the first time, Eula stood nearby, holding her breath. They loaded 20 kilograms of ore, 3 times as much coal. They pumped the bellows in turns, 2 hours, 3, 4. The temperature rose. The furnace roared. Junsk stood nearby and explained. Carbon from the coal combines with oxygen from the ore. Iron remains. Slag rises to the surface. The main thing is not to stop the air supply. Eula listened, nodded, pumped the bellows. After 5 hours, slag flowed from the bottom opening. Gray, liquid, hot. Eula opened the outlet channel. The slag flowed into the trough, and behind it, iron. Not ore, not stone, metal. Rough, bubbly, impure, but metal. 5 kilograms of pure iron from 20 kilograms of ore. Eula pulled the ingot out with tongs, placed it on the anvil. A new anvil made from a large flat stone. She raised the hammer. She struck. The metal rang out. Eula struck again, and again. Every blow sent sparks and slag flying. Every blow made the iron purer, denser, stronger. An hour later, a strip of metal lay before her. Smooth, pure, resonant. Eula picked it up. She looked at Junseok. Steel, almost. You need to repeat the heating and forging 3 more times. And add carbon, charcoal in the crucible with the metal. That will give you real steel. Eula nodded. She wasn't listening anymore. She was looking at the metal, and the metal was looking at her. On the 50th day, Eula made her first steel knife, real steel, with a horn handle, with a blade that shaved the hair off her arm, hardened in oil, springy, not brittle. She brought it to Mary. Mary took it, turned it over in her hands, tested the blade on her fingernail, whistled. Eula, this is better than what I had in Senhua. Eula adjusted her glasses. This is just the beginning. Rena approached. She looked at the knife, then at Eula. How many of these can you make? Eula thought. 1 every 2 days. If the ore doesn't run out and the bellows keep pumping without interruption, by spring you'll have 30 blades. Not swords, but long knives. Rena nodded. That'll be enough. On the 52nd day, the first delegation arrived from Tallinn. The village elder, an old man with a beard down to his waist, his 2 sons, a cart loaded with barley. They stood at the edge of the camp and watched, at the dugouts, at the mill, at the smithy, at the smoke from the smokehouse, at the garden beds covered with oiled cloth under the snow, beneath which cabbage was turning green. The village elder looked at the cabbage for a long time, then at the mill. Then he turned to Mary, who had come out to meet them. Your people built these. Mary nodded. The village elder was silent for a moment. Then he said, We need a mill. We grind grain with stones. It takes half a day for a sack. Mary looked at Junseok. Junseok stepped forward. We can build you a mill. The village head looked at him, warily. He had seen a human among the beast people, and it was strange. What for? We need workers. 10 men for 20 days. They'll come here and build. We'll teach them. When they return home, they'll build a mill there. The village head thought, for a long time. Then he said, And what else do you want? A trade agreement, an exchange every 10 days. Your grain and cloth for our smoked game and pickled vegetables. Fixed prices, no cheating. The village head looked at his sons. They exchanged glances. Then they nodded. And the Baron? If he finds out we're trading with you. Junseok smiled. The Baron will find out, and he'll have to decide which is cheaper, fighting us or trading through us. We'll offer him the second option. The village elder left with half their supply of smoked venison and a promise to send 10 men in a week. Rena stood next to Junseok and watched the cart drive away. You just hired a workforce. For food. I just made an ally. For respect. Food is a perk. Rena shook her head. A week later, 10 men arrived from Tallinn. Young, strong, frightened. They looked at the cat girls with horror and admiration at the same time. Nari met them at the entrance with her arms crossed and a look that made 2 of them try to run back. Junseok put them to work within the first hour, clearing the site for new houses, preparing clay, shaping bricks. They worked, clumsily, slowly, but they worked. By the end of the first week, they had stopped being afraid. By the end of the second, they were laughing at communal meals and trying to awkwardly flirt with Mary. Mary responded with slaps on the back of the head. Nari responded with a look. After Nari's look, the flirting would stop for a few days. The camp's population had grown, temporarily, but it had grown, and that was important. On the evening of the 58th day, a winter evening, a short day, a long night. Snow on the roofs, smoke from the chimneys. In the large dugout dining hall that had been finished a week ago, a long table made of planks, benches, light from oil lamps. Junseok stood by the stove. He was cooking tukkuk. He didn't have any rice dumplings. He made dumplings out of wheat flour. It didn't turn out quite right, but it looked the part. Broth made from deer bones, wild onions, sorrel, salt. He stirred and thought of his mother. She used to cook tukkuk every New Year's. She'd put a big pot on the stove and say, Son, you're definitely getting married this year. Every year the same thing. He smiled and didn't get married. Now he stood in a dugout at the other end of the universe, cooking soup for 34 cat girls and 10 human workers. He ladled it into bowls, hot, thick, steaming, smelling like home. They ate, in silence. It wasn't an ordinary silence. It was the silence of people who had forgotten that food can be more than just fuel. It can be care. That someone might stand at the stove not because they have to, but because they want to. Dahe was the first to cry, quietly, wiping her tears with her sleeve. Then Saren, then another, then another. Mary cursed under her breath and ate, and tears dripped into her bowl. Rena ate with her back straight, then the spoon stopped, then the spoon fell. Then Rena covered her face with her hands, and her shoulders shook. Eula silently handed her her handkerchief. Hana approached Junseok from behind. He felt her press her forehead against his back. Her hands rested on his shoulders. She didn't say anything. She just stood there. Saren climbed onto his lap with her bowl. She settled in. She continued eating. 2 tails wrapped around his arm. Mary looked at all this and said through her tears and with her mouth full, "I hate you. Who gave you permission to make such delicious food? Who?" Junseok stood with the child on his lap and the girl on his back, looking at the table where people he had known for 45 days were crying and eating. And he thought, "Mom, I think I found new sisters. I'm sorry." Yula built a blast furnace and began producing real steel. The village of Talon sent 10 workers in exchange for training and a trade agreement. The winter dinner with Tuk Cook was the moment when the camp ceased to be a camp and became a home. On the 60th day, a woman came to the camp. Alone, unarmed, without luggage, black hair with a single silver strand, gray eyes, cat-like ears pressed so tightly against her head they were almost invisible. She stood at the edge of the camp and waited. Nari spotted her first. She called out to the patrol. 2 archers took aim at her. The woman raised her hands, slowly. "I come in peace. I fled from Songhua. I have nowhere else to go." They brought her to Rina. Rina looked at her for a long time. Name, Ari Yoon, former court chronicler. Rina narrowed her eyes. "Chronicler? What did you do after the coup?" Ari lowered her eyes. "Chae Gyung-hae kept me at court. He forced me to keep records for him. I obeyed. He has my brother." Silence. Rina looked at Junseok. He stood to the side, watching. Rina turned back to Ari. "Your brother?" "Yes. He's 16. Cho is holding him in Songhua prison. If I don't return." She didn't finish. Rina nodded. She understood. "Why are you here?" "I heard that the Moon Claws are alive, that you're building a settlement. I thought, maybe you need someone who can read and write." Rina looked at Junseok again. Junseok nodded slightly. Rina sighed. "Show me your hands." Ari held out her hands, slender, pale, no calluses, the hands of a scribe. There was no brand on her wrist. She hadn't been in the Claws unit. She was a civilian. Rina stepped back. "Give her food and a place to stay. We'll sort this out later." Ari stayed. She had been useful from day one. Literate, quick, neat. She took charge of inventory, kept a log of incoming and outgoing supplies, calculated production quotas, recorded patrol results. Junseok finally got the person he'd been missing, an accountant. He dictated the numbers to her, and she wrote them down. He drew graphs on birch bark, and she translated them into tables. She understood him before he even finished speaking, sometimes faster than he could finish a sentence. A week later, she was taking minutes at the planning meetings. Junseok called the morning gatherings planning meetings, and Ari solemnly recorded the term in the settlement's chronicle as an official designation. Mary didn't trust her, openly, loudly. She'd come from Songhua, alone, without a brand. She says she ran away, but what if she didn't? What if she's a spy? Junseok heard this but didn't react. He watched Ari, the way she moved, the way she looked, the way she flinched when someone approached from behind, how she pressed her ears against her head when Rina raised her voice, how she sat alone at night and stared at the fire. He saw. A person running from fear looks different than a person running toward hope. Ari was doing both at the same time, and that was the problem. On the 70th day, Mary caught Ari at the edge of the camp. At night, Ari was standing by a tree, tying a strip of cloth to a branch, white, with knots. Mary grabbed her by the arm. Ari didn't resist. In the morning, they brought her to Rina. The cloth with the knots lay on a rock. "What is this?" Rina's voice was like ice. Ari was silent, her ears pressed flat, eyes down. "It's a signal ribbon." "For whom?" Silence. Rina leaned toward her. "For Morna." Ari swallowed. A barely perceptible nod. The camp buzzed. Nari demanded execution. Mary clenched her fists. Even Hana watched with pain and incomprehension. Rina stood with a sword at her waist and her hand resting on the hilt. Junseok was silent. He looked at Ari, at her flattened ears, at her hands, which she held on her lap, at her fingers, which were clenched so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. He didn't see a traitor. He saw a person with no choice. "Rina, give me 3 days." Rina turned to him. 3 days? Why? "Trust me." Rina looked at him. Then she took her hand off the sword. 3 days. Ari was locked in a separate dugout, under Nari's guard, who sat at the entrance, sharpening a knife with an expression that promised Ari nothing good. Junseok didn't interrogate Ari. Instead, he went to Mary. I need your help." Mary crossed her arms. "If you want me to spare that snake." "No, I want you to find me the smugglers." Mary blinked. "In Tallinn, you heard about the trade routes. Who transports goods past Morn's men? Who takes the paths the patrols don't know?" Mary thought for a moment. Then she nodded. "The village headman's youngest son. He used to lead caravans around the roadblocks. He quit when Morn caught 2 of his men. Find him. Tell him I have a job." Mary left. She returned 2 days later with a skinny guy of about 25, nervous, with shifty eyes. The guy's name was Talvin. He was a smuggler, a former one. Junseok talked to him for an hour, then 2. By the end of the 3rd hour, Talvin had stopped fidgeting and started drawing maps. Trails, crossings, secret caches, Morn's outposts, their schedules, how many men, when they rotate, where the blind spots are. Junseok wrote everything down. Then he asked the main question. "The prison in Seonghwa. Where is it? How is it guarded? Is it possible to get a person out?" Talvin looked at him. "From Seonghwa, from Che Gyung-hae's prison. You're crazy." "Maybe, but is it possible or not?" Talvin thought for a long time. Then he said, "There is one way, through the sewers of the old palace. They were built 200 years ago, and half of them have been forgotten. But we need money. You can't bribe the guards with meat." "How much?" 5 silver ken, or the equivalent. Junseok looked at Yula. "Yula, you can make a piece of jewelry, silver." "From what?" "From the silver on the tassel on Rina's ear." Silence. Everyone turned to Rina. Rina slowly raised her hand to her ear. A silver tassel, a sign of the captain's rank, the only thing left from her former life. Why? To save a 16-year-old boy from prison. Rina didn't answer. She took off the tassel, silently, placed it on the table, turned and left. A second later, she returned. She looked at Junseok. "Give it back to me when it's all over. I will, I promise." Talvin left with the brush and instructions. Mary went with him as an escort to the border of the Catlands. Nari continued to guard Eri. Eri didn't know what was happening. No one told her. 10 days passed, then 15. On the 80th day, Talvin returned. At night, alone. He was carrying a boy on his back, skinny, dirty, with a battered face, unconscious, but alive. Junseok met him at the entrance. He took the boy in his arms, carried him to the infirmary. Hana examined him. Exhaustion, beatings, 2 broken ribs, but he would live. Junseok carried the boy to Eri's dugout. He laid him on the bed next to her. She was asleep. He left. In the morning, Junseok sat in the camp courtyard drinking tea made from Hana's herbs. The door to Eri's dugout opened. She came out. Her face was wet. Her eyes were red, swollen. Her hands were shaking. She stood before him and couldn't speak. She just looked at him. Junseok took a sip of tea. Then he said, "Eri, we have an opening for Minister of Foreign Affairs. No blackmail this time." Eri fell to her knees, not from weakness. She bowed, her forehead to the ground. Her body shook with sobs. He didn't help her up. He let her cry it out. A minute later, she raised her head. "How?" "It doesn't matter how. What matters is that now you're free. And your brother is free. And I need someone to draft a trade agreement with Tallinn on proper paper, because we're running out of birch bark." Eri laughed, through her tears. It wasn't pretty, with sobs. Then she wiped her face. She stood up. She squared her shoulders, her ears perked up. For the first time since the day she arrived at the camp, "It will be done." Eri Yoon had come to the camp as Baron Morna's spy, blackmailed by her brother's imprisonment. Junseok exposed her, and instead of punishing her, he arranged for her brother's rescue through the smuggler Talvin. Eri was set free and took on the role of diplomat and settlement administrator. By the 90th day, the settlement was no longer a camp. Junseok stood on the hill and took stock. 12 living dugouts, a dining hall, a smithy with a blast furnace, a mill on the stream, a smokehouse, a drying room, a warehouse with a 40-day supply of food, an infirmary with 3 beds and shelves of herbs, a bathhouse. Yes, a bathhouse. He had built a bathhouse. It was easier than he thought. A dugout with a stove, stones on the stove, water on the stones, steam. The girls entered the bathhouse for the first time with suspicion. An hour later, they came out with such expressions that Junseok understood. He had just accomplished the most important thing in the world. Mary said she would kill anyone who tried to close the bathhouse. Rena said nothing but went there every evening. The population grew, 34 originally, plus Aries' brother. The boy's name was Ki-hyun, 16 years old, quiet, frightened. He didn't leave the dugout for the first week. Then Saren dragged him to class. Yes, class. Saren taught the children, 2 of them, herself and Ki-hyun. She found flat stones and scratched letters into them. She taught him to read all over again, because he had forgotten almost everything in prison. Junseok built her a shelter out of poles and fabric. He placed 2 stumps inside instead of chairs, and a flat stone instead of a table. It wasn't exactly a school, but Saren called it a school, and no one argued. On the 95th day, the first refugees arrived at the settlement. A family from the Wolf clan, a man, a woman, 2 children. They were coming from the north. They had been driven out of their village for debts. They were wandering aimlessly. They had heard from merchants that there was a place in the gray forest where they fed people and didn't beat them. Rena looked at Junseok. Wolves, not cats. Everyone is equal here. Rena raised an eyebrow, but she didn't argue. A week later, 3 more arrived. A lone fox, a former blacksmith, a bear with a broken arm, a cat boy from Senwa who had run away from conscription into the usurper's army. By the 100th day, the population was 46. By the 110th, 52. By the end of the 3rd month, 68. Junseok stopped counting himself. Eri kept the head count. Every new resident received a place in the dugout, a work assignment, a daily ration, and one phrase from Junseok himself. Welcome to Senwado. You're safe here. Senwado, New Senwa. Rena came up with the name, quietly, not at the planning meeting, in the evening by the campfire. She looked at the fire and said, "If we're building a new home, it should bear the name of the old one, so we won't forget." Junseok nodded. Senwado, all right. On the 115th day, Baron Morn sent a messenger, not a mercenary, not a soldier, a merchant, a fat one, a smiling one, with a cart full of gifts, fabric, spices, wine, and a letter. Rena read the letter aloud at the planning meeting. Baron Haldar Morn greets the residents of the settlement in the Grey Forest. The Baron proposes a trade agreement. The Baron is ready to forget past misunderstandings. The Baron wants peace and prosperity for all. Mary snorted. Past misunderstandings. He sent 18 thugs to sell us into slavery. Junseok took the letter, read it twice, then looked at Eri. What do you see? Eri tilted her head. He's afraid. Gifts, courtesy. It's the language of fear. He's lost control of Talon. Talon now trades with us directly. The other 2 villages do too. His chain is breaking. He's come to negotiate while he still can. Exactly. Junseok turned to Rena. We'll accept his invitation. Rena clenched her jaw. You want to meet the man who tried to enslave us? I want to meet the man who has what we need. Access to the royal court of Velgar, trade routes to the sea, blacksmiths and stonemasons we don't have. Rena was silent. Then she said, I'll go with you. No, Eri will go. She's a diplomat. I'm an engineer. You're the commander. We're each in our place. Rena wasn't happy, but she didn't argue. On the 120th day, Junseok and Eri set out for the meeting place. Neutral territory. An old bridge over a ravine, a 2-hour walk from the camp. Mary followed them 100 paces behind, with a bow, just in case. Baron Haldar Morn was not what Junseok had expected. Not a fat villain on a horse. Tall, thin, muscular, short-cropped gray hair, intelligent gray eyes, dressed simply, a leather jacket, boots, no jewelry, no entourage, just one servant with the horses. He looked at Junseok, then at Eri, then back at Junseok. So you're the one. So Junseok, an engineer. Morun repeated the word as if tasting it. An engineer. My people say you found water in the dead land, built houses, a blacksmith shop, a mill, that you're teaching the peasants things they didn't know, that your sauerkraut tastes better than in the capital. Junseok didn't smile. Cabbage is just cabbage, Mornay snorted. They stood on the bridge and looked at each other. 2 men who understood what was happening. One had been building an empire for 20 years, the other had been building a settlement for 4 months, and the latter was winning. Mornay spoke first. You took Talon from me. I gave Talon the mill. Talon chose for himself whom to follow. Mornay nodded. Soon you'll take the rest too. I won't. I'll offer an alternative. It's the same thing. No, an alternative leaves a choice. You never gave one. Mornay was silent. Then he said, "What do you want?" "Neutral status for Senvado, recognition of our territory, free trade with the villages without your... In return, you get 10% of the turnover and exclusive rights to our steel products." Mornay raised an eyebrow. Steel products. Eula makes blades that don't chip, knives that shave hair, tips that pierce chainmail. You saw the result. Mornay touched his shoulder. Where Mary's arrow had entered 3 months ago, I saw. Then you know the price, Mornay thought. For a long time, the wind ruffled his short hair. He gazed into the distance, at the gray forest, at the trees whose buds were swelling for the first time in millennia. This forest had been dead. 20 years ago, when I was assigned here, not even grass grew here. Now the trees are turning green. It wasn't me. Then who? Junseok didn't answer, because he didn't know. Morn looked at him. Then he said, "I don't trust you." "You don't have to. It's enough that you believe me. Those are different things." Morn snorted. Then he held out his hand. Junseok shook it. The handshake was firm, dry, businesslike. Morn turned as he walked away. He spoke quietly, but Junseok heard him. "That narrow-eyed devil isn't fighting me. He's devaluing me." Junseok watched him go. Eri stood nearby. She was writing down the terms on birch bark. He agreed, because he had no choice. "Now we need to put this in writing. Eri, draw up a contract, a complete one, with clauses, with seals." Eri nodded. "What seal shall we use?" Junseok turned to her. "Eula will make the seal, with the Senwa symbol." What symbol? Junseok thought. A house, just a house, with an open door. On the 130th day, news arrived from Songhua. Eri received it through her old network, a note hidden in the seam of a sack of fabric brought by a merchant from Tallinn. 3 lines. "Minister Che Gyung-hae knows that the Moonclaws are alive. He sent the silent hunters, 5 of them." Rina turned pale when she heard this. Junseok saw it. For the first time ever, he saw fear on Rina's face. Not anxiety, not caution, fear. "Who are the silent hunters?" Rina replied in an even voice, but her fingers on the sword hilt turned white. "Elite assassins of the Nyare clan. The jaguars, not the cats. A different branch. Faster than us. Stronger. Trained to kill in total darkness by scent and sound. They send a single silent hunter when they want to kill a general. They send 5 when they want to destroy a village." Silence. Mary placed her hand on her bow. "How much time do we have?" Eri looked at the note. "If they left a week ago, 10 days, maybe 12. The Jaguar people move fast, but stealthily. They won't take the roads. They'll go through the woods. Nari, step up the patrols, triple shifts. No one walks alone." Nari nodded. Rina straightened up. The fear had left her face. In its place stood steel. She turned to Junseok. "These aren't mercenaries. They won't be scared off by a moat or arrows. They'll bypass any trap. They'll sense any ambush. I know." Rina waited. Junseok thought. Not for a second, a minute, 2, 3. Everyone waited. Then he said, "They're following us because we're a threat. To Che Gyung-hae, we're a symbol. The living Moonclaws prove that his power is illegitimate. He doesn't need to destroy us. He needs us to cease to exist. And, if we stop being a refugee camp and become a recognized settlement with a trade agreement and allies, killing us would become an international incident, not a mop-up operation." Eri raised her head. "A treaty with Morn. Yes, but not only that. I need Morn to convey the information to the court of Velgar, that Senhuado exists, that they trade with us, that we produce steel and food, that our destruction will hit the border economy." Rina shook her head. "That's politics, and they're killers. Politics won't stop them. No, politics will stop the next ones. You'll stop these 5. Rina looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. "All right, then I need armor." Junseok turned to Eula. Eula was already standing. Her glasses were adjusted. Her arms were crossed. What arms? Light. Agile. For cats. Not for humans. Cats move differently. Faster. More flexible. They need protection that doesn't get in the way of jumping. Eula nodded. "I've seen how Rina moves. I know her body. Give me 7 days." Junseok looked at Rina. Rina looked at Eula. For the first time, her gaze toward the artisan wasn't condescending. It was respectful. Eula worked for 7 days without stopping. She slept for 3 hours at a time. She ate at the anvil. Junseok brought her food and tea. Eula took it and didn't stop working. She was making a breastplate, shoulder guards, arm guards, leg guards, all made of spring steel, thin plates on a leather base. The plates overlapped like scales. When she moved, they slid and didn't restrict her body. When struck by a sword, they distributed the force across the surface. Eula tested every plate. She bent them. She tapped them. She threw them against a stone. If a plate broke, she remelted it and started over. On the 3rd day, she asked Rena to come for a fitting. Rena stood in the middle of the smithy in her underwear. Eula measured her with her hands. Every curve, every joint, the length of her arms, the width of her shoulders, her bust. She did this silently and with intense focus, just as she had made locks with 24 parts. Rena stood motionless. Only her ears twitched. On the 6th day, the armor was assembled. Rena put it on. She moved around, crouched, jumped, turned around, drew her sword, made 3 strikes, a block, a parry, a lunge. The armor moved with her like a second skin. Rena stopped. She looked at herself, then at Eula. This is better than what I had at the palace. Eula adjusted a plate on her shoulder. She shifted it slightly. Better now. And she added one more detail. Inside the breastplate, on the steel plate closest to the heart, an engraving. The Nair clan's emblem. A crescent moon with 3 claws. Rena saw it. She touched it with her fingers. Then she withdrew her hand. Why? So the clan would be closer to her heart? It was Junseok who asked for it. Rena looked at Junseok. He was standing at the entrance to the smithy, looking at her in her armor, at the captain of the moon claws, who looked like a captain again. Rena turned away, quickly, but he had noticed. His eyes were shining. On the 137th day, Nari's patrol detected movement on the southern border. Not tracks, not sounds, a scent. The cats sensed what humans could not. A foreign scent, predatory, unfamiliar, jaguar-like. They are here. Rena stood in the center of the camp in full armor, sword drawn. 8 archers surrounded her, 4 swordswomen, all in armor. Eula had managed to make sets for all 12 fighters, lightweight, fast, each tailored to a specific body. Junseok stood on the hill. Beside him was a mountain crystal spyglass that Eula had assembled last week. He gazed into the darkness. 2 moons, white and gold. Light fell on the snow, on the trees. Buds had turned into leaves, green, alive. The gray forest was slowly ceasing to be gray. He didn't see the silent hunters. No one saw them. That was the point. They were somewhere in the darkness, 5 of them, faster and stronger than anyone in the camp. Junseok couldn't build a moat against them. He couldn't set traps they wouldn't sense. He did the only thing he could. He gave Rena the best weapons and the best armor in the world. He gave her 12 warriors in the same armor. He gave her a map of the territory with every tree and rock marked. He gave her a plan, and he stepped aside, because the rest was her job. Rena turned toward him, across the courtyard, through 30 meters of darkness. Their eyes met. She nodded. He nodded. Tell Rena, it's time. Nari ran off with the message, and Rena went into the forest, with a sword, in spring steel armor engraved with the clan's crest on her heart. 12 shadows followed her. Junseok remained on the hill. He sat and listened to the darkness. Saren approached and sat down beside him, silently, 2 tails wrapped around her knees. They sat and waited. 2 hours later, Mary returned from the forest, blood on her cheek, a smile on her face. 4 are ready. The 5th is gone. Wounded, won't get far. Casualties. Mary's face darkened. 2 are wounded, seriously. 1 broken arm, Rena's, a wound on her thigh, deep. Hana ran into the forest. Junseok stood up. Saren clung to his arm. He gently pried her fingers loose, ran after Hana. Rena was sitting by a tree. The armor on her thigh was slashed open, 3 plates torn off, blood beneath them, a lot of blood. She was pressing her hand against the wound. Her face was pale, but alive. Her eyes were open. She looked at him. 4 out of 5, not bad for peasant girls. She tried to smile. She couldn't. Hana dropped to her knees. Her hands didn't tremble. She washed the wound, bandaged it, stopped the bleeding. Everything by the book, everything by the system. Junseok stood nearby and watched. Rena looked up at him. The armor saved my life. The blow was aimed at the heart. The plate deflected it. Junseok nodded. Then he sat down beside her. Then he said, "Don't do that again." Rena closed her eyes. "I can't promise." Rena healed slowly. The wound on her thigh was deep. Hana changed the bandages twice a day. She washed it with a decoction of willow bark she found by the stream. She recorded everything in a journal: temperature, color of the wound, smell. On the third day, the fever subsided. On the fifth, Rena got up. On the seventh, she hobbled around the camp leaning on a stick. On the 10th, she threw away the stick and walked on her own. Hana said it was too soon. Rena didn't listen. She never listened when it came to her own body, but she listened to Hana when it came to others. 2 wounded from the night battle were recovering. One had a broken arm. Eula made a splint out of steel plates and leather straps. Hana applied it and secured it. A month later, the arm had healed, straight, without any misalignment. Hannah looked at her notes and said for the first time without stuttering, "I know what I'm doing." The 5th silent hunter hadn't returned. Nari combed the forest for 2 weeks. She found traces of blood. Then the trail went cold. Either he died or he went far away. Rena said that a wounded jaguar wouldn't go far alone in winter, but her eyes were wary. Junseok didn't think about the 5th hunter. He had more important things to do. The 150th day. 5 months. Winter was past its midpoint. The snow was knee-deep, but in San Juado, chimneys were smoking. The mill was running. The smithy was humming. Cabbage and onions were growing green in the garden beds under the greenhouse canopies. Deer and boar carcasses hung in the smokehouse. Jars of pickles and barrels of salted fish stood in the storeroom. 60 days' worth of provisions. The system window showed infrastructure, 38%. Morale, high. Population, 74 people. 74. Newcomers arrived every week. Refugees from the catlands, from the wolflands, from human villages. Serfs who had fled their masters. Artisans without guild seals. Families evicted for debts. Old people abandoned by their children. Junsk accepted everyone, a place for everyone, work for everyone, a bowl of hot food for dinner for everyone. Eri was keeping the head count and complained that they were running out of birch bark. Junseok looked at her and said, "Then we'll make paper." Eri blinked. Paper. Grind the bark, soak it in water, stir it into a paste, pour it in a thin layer onto cloth, dry it. Paper. Eri opened her mouth, closed it. Then she left, and 3 days later brought the first sheet. Crooked, thick, with bits of bark mixed in, but paper, on which one can write. Junseok unfolded the sheet and wrote the first document of Sunghuado on it, the settlement charter. Everyone who lives here is equal, beastfolk and humans, men and women, master and apprentice. The land belongs to everyone. Work is divided according to skill. Food is divided according to need. Whoever comes in peace is at home. Rena read it and was silent for a long time. Then she said, "It's naive. Perhaps, but it's written down, and what is written down has power." Eri made 3 copies. One was hung in the dining hall. One was sent to Tallinn. One was hidden in the stonework of the well, in case everything else burns down. On the 160th day, Junseok received a message from the system that he hadn't expected. An anomaly detected. An energy source beneath the settlement's territory. Depth, 12 meters. Type, unknown. Investigation recommended. He stood in the middle of the courtyard and looked at the window. An energy source. Beneath them. 12 meters. He remembered. The seeds that sprouted 3 times faster. The trees that turned green in the dead forest. The water in the well that never ran dry. The ground that was warmer than it should be. He remembered what Saren had said in her sleep. A white cat, huge, under the roots. He went to Saren. She was sitting at school, teaching Kihyun to count on pebbles. "Saren, tell me about the white cat." Saren froze. "How do you know?" "You talk in your sleep." Saren blushed. Her ears flattened. Then she spoke softly. I see her every night, big, white, lying underground, under the roots. She doesn't sleep. She listens. To us. How we build, how we eat, how we laugh. And she's happy. Junseok sat down next to her. How long have you been seeing her? Since the first night, when you arrived.
She woke up when you found water.
Junseok looked at Saren, at her huge amber eyes, at the two tails wrapped around her legs. She's 14, and she sees what no one else sees. Then he found out he was wrong. She wasn't the only one who saw it. Rena also saw the white cat in her dream, and Mary, and Hana, and Eula, and Nari, and every one of the 34, all of them cats, every single one, the same dream, every night. The white cat lies under the roots and listens. Junseok called a meeting. There's something beneath us. I don't know what, but it's helping us. The seeds are growing faster. The water never runs out. The forest is coming to life, and you're all having the same dream. Silence. Rena spoke first. Hogyong. Junseok looked at her. An ancient spirit, a feline deity, a legend of the Nairi clan. They say that before the War of Dawn, Hogyong guarded these lands. Then the people of the old empire imprisoned him. For what? For protecting the beastfolk. Silence. Long. Heavy. Eri raised her head. If Hogyong is beneath us, if he is waking up, that changes everything. Junseok nodded. But first I need to see for myself. He went out at night, alone, against all of Rena's objections, against Mary, who followed him to the edge of the camp and was only stopped by his direct order. He walked in the darkness, along a path he could feel with his feet. The ground was warm, even through the snow. He came to the old oak in the center of the gray forest, the largest one, the oldest one, dead for 2 years. Now it had leaves, green, in the middle of winter. Junseok sat down at the roots. He closed his eyes, and he felt it. He didn't see it. He didn't hear it. He felt it. Warmth, deep, alive, coming from below, like an ondol, like the heated floor he used to build for the girls, only 1,000 times older, 1,000 times greater, 1,000 times gentler. He sat by the oak and felt the earth breathing beneath him, and for the first time in this world, he didn't feel like a stranger. Spring came on the 180th day, 6 months. The snow was melting, streams swelled, and the gray forest blossomed. Not a metaphor, it blossomed. Leaves sprouted on trees that had been dead for 2,000 years, pale green, delicate, fragile, like the first leaves on a sapling. Then flowers appeared, on 3 trees at the eastern edge of the forest, white, with a pink tinge, 5 petals, sakura. Junseok stood beneath them and looked up. Petals fell on his face, on his shoulders, on his palm. Cherry blossoms. In a world where they had never existed, he thought of Korea, of spring in Seoul, of the park by the Han River where he used to walk with his mother every April, of how she would gather the petals in her palm and say that each petal was one happy day. He stood there and the petals fell. Saren approached. She looked up. Hogyong. It's Hogyong. Yes, it's Hogyong. News of the blossoms spread quickly. Merchants from Talon saw them and passed the word on. A week later, people began streaming towards Songhwado. Not refugees, just people. To see. Trees are blooming in the cursed forest. This hasn't happened in 2,000 years. Mary stood at the entrance and counted. 30 people in 3 days. 40, 50. They came. They looked. They touched the bark. They sniffed the flowers. They looked at the settlement, at the mill, at the smithy, at the fields turning green after the snow melted, at the cat girls in steel armor, at the man in a t-shirt with Korean characters, and they left. With stories. That became rumors. That became legends. The curse is lifted. The gray forest has come to life. An engineer lives there who finds water in dead earth and makes steel that does not break. Baron Morn has sent a second messenger, this time not a merchant, a secretary, with an official letter. King Velgar had heard of the events in the gray forest. The king is interested. The king invites a representative of Songhwado to court. Eri read the letter at the planning meeting. Then she looked at Junseok. This is either a trap or an opportunity, or both. Eri nodded. I'll go. Junseok shook his head. We'll go, together. Rena stood up. Me too. No, you're staying. You're the commander. Songhwado is vulnerable without you. Rena clenched her jaw, then she nodded. But Mary will go with you, as a bodyguard. Mary smirked. Let anyone try to leave me behind. They set out on the 190th day, Junseok, Eri, Mary, Nari as a second guard. A cart with gifts, steel knives made by Eula, sauerkraut in clay pots, bundles of smoked meat. And one thing Eula had been making for the past 2 weeks in secret from everyone except Junseok. A box, made of polished steel, with a mechanism inside, 24 parts. It opened only if you pressed 3 hidden buttons in the correct sequence. Inside, 5 grains of wheat, a sprig of dried lavender, and a note on paper. We grow what hasn't been here for 2,000 years. For the king, it was a gift. For Junseok, it was a message. We know how to do what you do not, and we are ready to teach. The court of Velgar was not what he expected. Not a stone castle with knights and banners. A wooden palace, large, but wooden, with carved beams, with stained glass windows that were the pride of the realm and cost more than the entire city around them. The king of Velgar, Theron II, elderly, quiet, with intelligent eyes. He sat on a wooden throne and listened. Eri spoke, professionally, clearly, every word in its place. She presented Senwado, its history, its achievements, its trade opportunities, the statistics she had been compiling for the past 3 months. Population growth, production volume, steel quality, crop yields. The king listened. Then he asked to see the box. Eula would have been proud. 3 court craftsmen fiddled with it for an hour and couldn't open it. Junseok opened it in a second. The king looked at the wheat grains inside, then at Junseok. You grow wheat in the Grey Forest? Yes. Where nothing has grown for 2,000 years? Yes. How? We take care of the land. The king was silent. Then he stood up. He walked over to Junseok. He looked him in the eyes. What do you want? Recognition of Songhwado as a neutral trading post under the protection of the Velgar crown. Free passage across borders, the right to land. In exchange for what? Technology, mills, steel, crop rotation, medicine, everything we know. For your villages, for your cities, free of charge. The courtiers began to whisper. Free of charge, not free of charge. For peace, for recognition, for the right to exist. The king thought for 3 days. On the 4th, he signed the decree. Songhwado, a neutral trading post, under the protection of the crown, with the right to land within the borders of the former Grey Forest. Eri cried as she affixed the Senhwado seal to the document, a seal with a house and an open door. Mary stood nearby and pretended not to. It didn't look good. On the way back, Junseok sat in the cart and said nothing. Mary walked beside him. She glanced at him.
What are you thinking about?
About how 6 months ago I was lying in a ravine and didn't know where I was, and now we have the king's decree. Mary snorted. Life is a strange thing, especially when you have 2 moons overhead. The 9th month, the 271st day. The population of Songhwado had passed 200, then 250, then 280. They came every day, cats, wolves, foxes, people. One family from the Bear clan with 3 children, a blacksmith father with hands the size of Sedin's head. He saw Eula's blast furnace and sat down on the ground and was silent for 10 minutes. Then he stood up. He walked over to Eula. He said, "Teach me." Eula taught him. A month later, he was forging steel strips faster than she could. His hands were made for a hammer. Eula switched to precision work, mechanisms, gears, bearings, locks. The lathe she had been assembling from Junseok's blueprints for the past 2 months. The settlement had turned into a city, not a city in the usual sense, a city in the sense of complexity. Streets, workshops, a Tuesday market where merchants from 5 villages came, a bakery, a real bakery, with bread made from wheat flour. When Junseok baked his first loaf, people stood in line for 3 hours. Seren's school had grown. 3 sheds, 40 students, children and adults. Seren taught reading and arithmetic. Eri taught history. Once a week, Junseok taught a class on what he called the basics of engineering thinking. These were stories about why water flows downhill, why a wheel turns, why soap cleans, why boiled water is safer than raw water. Seren sat in the front row and wrote down every word. She was 15. She had grown over the past year. She had stretched out. Her once chubby child's face had become slimmer and more serious. Her 2 pigtails no longer twitched at every sound. She walked through the settlement with a birch bark folder and the air of someone with a mission. She no longer fell asleep on Junseok's lap. Once he told her, "You've grown up." She looked at him. She smiled. "No, I just stopped being afraid." Baron Morn was honoring the agreement. 10% of the turnover. Exactly. No cheating. He came to Songhwa-do once a month. He drank tea. He looked at the construction sites. He shook his head. On the 280th day, he sat in the dining hall across from Junseok and drank tea made from lavender and mint that Hana had concocted according to her own recipe. Morn took a sip, set the cup down, looked at it, then at Junseok. "What the hell is this? Lavender tea?" "No, not tea. All of this." He swept his arm around. "A year ago, this was a desert, dead land, a cursed place. Now there's a town here, with a mill, with a smithy, with a bakery, with a school, with steel armor, with blossoming trees. How do you do this?" Junseok took a sip of tea. "Not me. Them." He nodded toward the window. Outside the window, Mary was drilling the recruits on the parade ground. Eula was hammering away in the smithy. Hana was handing out herbal concoctions in the infirmary. Ari was sitting at a table drafting a trade agreement with a new village. Rena was standing on the wall, gazing into the distance. Nari was patrolling the perimeter. Saren was teaching the children to count to 100. I just showed them where to dig. Morn finished his tea. He stood up. He looked at Junseok with a long gaze. "Sunson Nim, I don't understand how you do it. At least teach me how to brew tea," Junseok taught him. Morn left with the tea recipe and the expression of a man who had spent 20 years building an empire and suddenly realized he had been building the wrong thing. On the 300th day, news arrived from Songhwa. Chue Gyung-hae was losing control. His subjects were fleeing, not just the beastmen, the people who worked at court, servants, artisans, small merchants. They were heading south, toward the border, toward the gray forest, toward Senhwa-do. Because in Senhwa-do, they were fed. In Senhwa-do, they were treated. In Senhwa-do, they weren't beaten. In Senhwa-do, one could work and eat the fruits of one's labor. Rumors spread like wildfire. Recipes for sauerkraut, descriptions of steel knives, stories of warm floors in a bathhouse, of a school where they taught for free, of a healer who treated with boiled water and clean bandages, not prayers, of a white cat sleeping under the roots, whom all cats see in their dreams. Chue Gyung-hae sent an army, not assassins, an army, 500 men, to the border of the gray forest. Rena received a report from the scouts, 500. The regular army of Songhwa, cavalry, infantry, archers, heading for our border, 2 days' march. Junseok sat in the planning meeting and listened. 500 against 280, of whom 40 are combat ready. A head-on clash is impossible. Rena knew that. Mary knew that. Nari knew that. Junseok knew that. He stood up. "We won't fight." Rena looked at him. "We'll feed them." He unfolded the map. "Eri, how many leaflets can we print in 2 days?" Eri blinked. "Print. Carve letters into wooden blocks, apply paint, press against paper, print." Eri calculated in her head. "With 5 workers, 100, 200. I need 500, 1 for every soldier." Silence. "What will be on the leaflets?" "A bread recipe, a map of the road to Senwado, and 1 sentence. Here they will give you land and feed you." Rena looked at him, then at the map, then at him again. "You want to dismantle the army with propaganda? I want to offer every soldier a choice, the usurper's sword or Senwado's bread." Mary snorted. "And if they choose the sword? Then we fight. But I don't think 500 hungry peasants in uniform will choose the sword when they're offered land." By the 9th month, Songhwa-do had become a town with a population of 280, complete with a market, a school, and a bakery. Baron Morn became a de facto ally. The usurper, Chue Gyung-hae, lost control of his subjects and sent an army of 500 men, to whom Junseok decided to appeal not with weapons, but with leaflets containing a bread recipe and a promise of land. The leaflets were printed over 2 days. Aries supervised. 5 people carved letters into wooden blocks. Eula made a printing frame in 4 hours. They mixed the ink from soot and oil. They boiled paper from bark. By the end of the 2nd day, 512 leaflets lay in stacks in the dining hall. On each one, a bread recipe. Simple. Flour, water, salt, sourdough starter, how to knead, how to bake. Next to the recipe was a map, the road from the border to Senhuado, and one sentence. Here they'll give you land and feed you. Come. Mary looked at the stacks and shook her head. Do you really think a piece of paper will stop an army? Not a piece of paper. Bread. The paper will only tell them where to get it. Rena disagreed. She was preparing defenses, trenches, embankments, archer positions. If the leaflets didn't work, they needed a plan. Junseok didn't argue. He knew Rena was right. They needed both. On the 305th day, the Songhua army set up camp halfway to the Songhuado border. 500 men, tents, campfires, horses. Choi Gyung-hae's banners, black with gold. Nari reported, "They don't look like an army that wants to fight. They look like an army that was forced to march." Junseok nodded. At night, Mary and 15 of Songhuado's best runners set out into the darkness. Each carried 30 leaflets. They crept toward the enemy camp. They slipped the leaflets under the edges of the tents, into the wood piles, under the saddles, into provision sacks, near the campfires where the sentries dozed. Not a single one was spotted. In the morning, the army woke up and found the papers. 500 papers. Everywhere. In every tent. In every sack. Next to every campfire. The army commander, General No Sun-yong, an old warrior, loyal to the clan, not to the usurper, but bound by orders. He read the leaflet, a recipe for bread, a map, a single sentence. He crumpled the paper, threw it into the fire, ordered the advance. The army moved toward the border of Songhuado. Slowly, reluctantly, the soldiers marched in silence. Junseok stood on the hill. Next to him, Rena in full armor, Mary with a bow, 40 fighters in position, 240 civilians in shelters. The night vision goggles were flashing. Junseok didn't look at them. He looked at the army marching toward them, and waited. The army stopped 300 paces away. The general rode forward, alone, on horseback. Junseok looked at Rena. Rena nodded. He rode down the hill. He rode out into the open space between the army and the settlement. Alone, unarmed, wearing a t-shirt with the Samsung construction logo and rough fabric pants that Eula had sewn for him 2 months ago because his jeans had finally torn beyond repair. The general looked down at him from his horse. "You, that engineer, the one with Junseok." The general looked him over. The t-shirt, the pants, the lack of a weapon, the calloused hands. "You don't look like someone who overthrows empires." "I don't overthrow them. I build them." The general paused. "The leaflets, your work." "Yes, the bread recipe." The general snorted. "My soldiers have been reading it aloud to each other all morning. Half of them have memorized it. A good recipe." The general dismounted. He stood next to Junseok. He was a head taller, broader in the shoulders. His hand was on his sword, but his eyes were tired. "I have orders to destroy the settlement, to kill everyone, to bring back the heads of the moon claws." "I know." The general looked at him. Then he turned and looked at the settlement behind him, at the rooftops, at the smoke from the chimneys, at the mill, at the green trees, at the cherry blossoms in bloom, at the wall behind which Rena stood in steel armor with a sword. Then the general looked back, at his army, at the 500 men who stood and waited, at their faces, at their eyes, which did not look at the settlement as a target, which looked at the settlement as a dream. 29 of my soldiers deserted last night. After the leaflets, they went to you. I know. Mary reported it this morning. 29 men. They came out to the camp, hungry, frightened. Hana fed them. They were put up in spare dugouts. The general stood and said nothing. The wind ruffled his coat. Then he said, "Show me that bread." Junseok led him to the bakery. The general ate the bread, fresh, warm, with a crispy crust. He ate in silence, slowly, like a man who hadn't eaten real bread in a long time. Then he set down Hana's cup of tea. Then he said, "Choi Kyung-hae pays my soldiers 3 pennies a month. Half of them don't even get that. They eat watery porridge without salt. They sleep on the bare ground. Their families are starving at home." He looked at Junseok. What will you offer them? Land, 2 hectares per family, a house, work, food, school for the children, and not a single penny, because money isn't needed here. What's needed here are hands. The general stood. Then he sat down. Then he took off his helmet. Gray hair, a scar across his entire forehead, tired eyes. I served the Naira clan for 30 years. I served Queen Soni. When she was poisoned, I did nothing. I submitted to the usurper, because it was safer that way. Silence. Rena stood in the bakery doorway. Junseok didn't know when she had entered. The general saw her. He stood up. Captain Rena, General No. They looked at each other for a long time. Then the general dropped to one knee. My 500 soldiers. That's 500 families, 500 homes, 500 pairs of hands. If you accept us, they are yours. Rena looked at Junseok. Junseok nodded. Rena turned to the general. Stand up. No one kneels here. By evening that day, 500 soldiers of the Songhua army had laid down their weapons at the gates of Songhua-do. Not all of them voluntarily. There were those who didn't want to. There were those who were afraid. There were those who hated the beastmen and had no intention of living with them. 62 people went back to Senhua. The remaining 438 stayed. In a single day, the population of Senhua-do grew to over 700. Junseok stood on the hill that evening, watching the field where the new residents were pitching their tents. Rena stood beside him. She was without armor, in a simple shirt. Her hair was loose. A sword hung at her belt, but her hand wasn't on the hilt. For the first time. We won't be able to accommodate everyone. We'll accommodate them. It'll take a month, maybe 2, but we'll find a way. Rena was silent. Then she spoke. You know what just happened? The usurper's army has switched sides. Not to our side, to their own. They chose themselves. Rena looked at him. Then, quietly and simply, she draped her captain's cloak over his shoulders, covering them both. And for the first time, she called him by name, without the title, without rank. Junseok. Thank you. He didn't answer. They stood on the hill under a single cloak and looked at the lights of the new city. A year had passed, the 365th day since Seo Junseok opened his eyes beneath 2 moons. He stood in the Hogyong temple, alone. The temple wasn't built by people, it grew on its own. The roots of an old oak tree had intertwined to form a vaulted ceiling, walls of living wood, a floor of moss. Light filtered through the foliage and fell in patches onto the ground. In the center of the temple lay a bowl of water, stone, ancient. Junseok found it while digging the foundation for a new granary, 3 meters underground. A bowl made of white stone that wasn't found anywhere in the area. He brought it here, placed it on the moss, poured water into it, and sat down beside it. The ground beneath him was warm, like an ondol, like the heated floor he had built during the first week for 34 hungry girls. He closed his eyes and felt it, the warmth, growing, enveloping, coming from below and from all around, and the weight, soft, as if a huge head had settled on his lap. He opened his eyes, a white cat, not in a vision, not in a dream, here, huge, the size of a horse, white fur without a single spot, eyes closed, head on his lap, warm, heavy, alive. Hogyong, the cat opened one eye, golden, bright as the moon, like a second moon in this world. Junseok wasn't afraid. He placed his hand on the head between its ears. The fur was soft, warm, like Sedin's fur when she fell asleep on his lap. He sat there and said nothing. Hogyong was silent too. Then a voice sounded in Junseok's head. Not a voice, a thought, a stranger's, ancient, warm. You repair. Junseok blinked. What? You repair. Homes, people, the earth. You repair what is broken. Junseok swallowed. I'm an engineer. I'm used to it. Hogyong closed his eyes, then opened them again. I've been waiting 2,000 years. The people of the old empire imprisoned me because I defended those who lived on my land. They said the land belongs to those who are stronger. I didn't agree. They sealed me under a stone, and the land died, because I was that land. Junseok listened, his hand on Hogyong's head, fur beneath his fingers. I reached out to you across worlds, across the rift, across the concrete step at the Gyeongdong market. Do you know why? No. Because you told your mother you'd relay her ondol. Because her floor is cold. Junseok froze. I wasn't looking for an engineer, not a warrior, not a hero. I was looking for someone who fixes the floor for his mother. Because such a person would fix the floor for everyone. Junseok sat and said nothing. Something heavy was stuck in his throat. The bridge went only one way. I can't bring you back. Junseok nodded. He knew. He'd known for a long time. From the very first day, he'd known somewhere deep down. He just didn't let it rise to the surface. But I can show you. The water in the bowl rippled, then it became smooth, and a face appeared in it. An elderly woman, gray hair, wrinkles around her eyes, an apron covered in flour. She was standing in a kitchen that Junseok would recognize out of a million. Mom's kitchen, the new apartment in Seoul, the very one he never got around to visiting to lay the floor. Mom stood at the stove and taught the neighbor kids how to make kimchi, 2 boys and a girl, about 10 years old. Mom showed them how to knead the cabbage with the pepper paste, how to salt it, how to pack it into the jar. The children laughed. Mom smiled. Then one of the neighbors asked, "And your son?" "He's far away." Mom didn't stop smiling. "Far away. Very far away. For work. He rarely calls. But I know. He's doing fine. I can feel it." Junseok watched his mom in a bowl of water. He hadn't cried since the first day he was born. 365 days, not a single tear. Now he was crying, silently, without a sound. Tears streamed down his face and dripped onto the white mat Hogyo. The cat didn't move. She lay there, warm, waiting. "Mom, I'm doing fine. I have a home here, a big one, with heated floors, with people, with a family. You would have loved them. They're good people." He sat in the temple and cried, stroking the head of the ancient god who had dragged him across worlds for a single phrase about a cold floor. The water in the bowl settled. Mom's face vanished. Hogyon raised his head. He looked at him with both eyes, golden, ancient, bottomless. "You built a house on my bones. You fed my children. You gave me back my land. Thank you." "Little man." Hogyon stood up, stretched like an ordinary cat, huge, white, in the temple of living roots. Then he lay back down, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. Truly, for the first time in 2,000 years, not in captivity, at peace. The earth trembled, gently, like a sigh, and throughout the gray forest, which hadn't been gray for a long time, all at once, on every tree, flowers bloomed, white, with pink. Thousands, tens of thousands, sakura. Junseok stepped out of the temple. Petals fell from the sky like snow, white and pink against the blue sky. The whole forest was in bloom, from horizon to horizon. Rena was standing at the entrance. She was waiting for him. She was always waiting. She saw his face, red eyes, wet cheeks. She didn't ask. She just sat down next to him, silently, shoulder to shoulder. Just like that first night by the campfire, only now there was no distance between them. They sat under the blossoming trees and were silent. Then Rena said, "We're home." "Yes, we're home." 6 months later, a year and 6 months since the relocation, the founding Congress of the Baeksuhwa Empire, the new capital, Songhwa-do, the central square. Not a throne, a long table, the very one at which they had eaten tteokguk on that winter evening. Only longer, much longer. Delegates sat on both sides, 7 cat clans, 2 wolf clans, 1 fox clan, 3 human clans. General No Sun-young represented the former soldiers of Songhwa who had become farmers and blacksmiths. Baron Morn sat at the edge of the table and drank lavender tea with the expression of a man who didn't believe what was happening, but had come anyway. Choi Gyung-hae had been overthrown a month ago, not by a storming, not by a siege. His own guard opened the gates of Songhwa when a caravan from Songhwa-do brought bread and leaflets. 3,000 leaflets. With recipes, with maps, with a single offer. "Here they will give you land and feed you. Come." The guards opened the gates. The servants opened the doors. Choi Gyung-hae fled that night, alone, without an entourage. They found him a week later in a ditch by the road, starving, filthy, pitiful. Rena stood over him and looked down, for a long time. Then she said, "Get up, eat, and get out." He wasn't worth her sword. People stood in Songhwado Square, many people, 1,000, 2,000, more, those who came from nowhere and found a home. Rena stood to the right of the table, in full armor, sword drawn, no gloves. The brand on her wrist was visible to everyone. Mary held the banner of the new state, a gray wolf, a white cat, a human hand, against the backdrop of the rising sun. She stood straight and her tail didn't twitch. It stood straight, like a flagpole. Eula stood to the left. She held a hoop in her hands, simple, silver, thin. She had remelted it from Rena's silver brush, the very one they had given up for Aries' brother. Talvin brought it back 6 months later, just as Junseok had promised, just as he had promised. Hana stood next to Eula. Her apron was white, her hands were calm. She was serving tea to the delegates, her tea, lavender with mint, a recipe now known across the entire continent. Aries sat at the table with a pen and paper. She was taking minutes. Item 1, establishment. Item 2, charter. Item 3, miscellaneous. Saren stood in front of the table. She was 15, silver gray, 2 ponytails, amber eyes. She had grown up. She had written the oath herself, in her own handwriting. On paper she had learned to make herself. She read it aloud. Her voice didn't tremble. We are those who were cast out to die, and we became a home for all who have nowhere to go. This is not an empire of the sword. This is an empire of a threshold one can step onto. Silence, then noise, then a scream, then a roar, thousands of voices. Eula approached Junseok. She held out the ring. He took it, turned it in his hands, looked at the silver, then at Rena, at Mary, at Eula, at Hana, at Eri, at Saren, at everyone, at each one. Then he put the hoop on himself, without ceremony, without bows, like a hard hat on a construction site, crooked. Eula adjusted it. He smiled. Then he looked up at the sky. The sun was breaking through the clouds. Cherry blossom petals swirled over the square. 2 moons paled in the daytime sky, white and gold. He said quietly, just to himself, just to Hogyun, who heard everything. We're putting the facility into operation, boss. Next, we'll move on to the second phase. Then he sat down at the table, at the head. Rena sat to his right. She placed her sword on the table in front of her, blade toward herself, hilt toward him, a sign of a warrior's absolute trust. Mary sat on the left, a bow on her back, red wood and Korean symbols on the handle, for the one who brings home. Eula sat next to Mary. Her glasses glistened, hands on the table, fingers slender and precise, ready to build whatever he draws. Hana sat next to Eula, a journal in her hands, notes, observations, facts, evidence-based medicine in a world where people still believe in prayers. Eri sat at the end of the table, a quill in her hand, paper in front of her, minutes. Item 4, the first dinner of the Baeksu Hua Empire. Saren climbed onto the bench next to Junseok, 15 years old, long-legged, 2 ponytails, a teacher. She rested her head on his shoulder. Oppa. What? I want tteokguk. Junseok laughed, for the first time in a long time, for real, loudly. Rena looked at him, and the corners of her lips twitched. Mary burst out laughing. Eula smiled quietly. Hana blushed and hid her face behind a magazine. Eri wrote it down in the log. Item 5, tteokguk. Somewhere far away, on the other side of the continent, in another world, another person opened their eyes under unfamiliar stars, and a window with unfamiliar text flashed before them. But that's another story, and this one is over. The project is complete. The house is built, and the floor is warm.